Thank you all very much, and welcome to second day of the meeting. I apologize for running late yesterday. The first order of business, I think, is we call it the board chair's report. I think that might be a misnomer. Before we start with a couple things, I really think we're in a little bit of a celebratory mood. There is a publication called Mo Scout. I don't know how many of you know that. That's a publication that the lobbyists and the legislators and the business community gets, which by Dave Drebs, who writes for the St. Louis Business Journal, and really is pretty good at keeping his pulse, not on just the facts of what's going on in Jefferson City and in the Capitol, but also what the feeling is. And I want to read to you, and Dave gave me permission to read this because it's a closed document for subscribers only. But after the House budget markup, and I'm reading a quote, one observer notes the 180-degree change in the relationship and respect between the committee and University of Missouri System President Moon Choi compared to how terrible it was with his predecessor. And it's not done till it's done, but I will say that the work that Moon and Dusty and everybody else has put in with the Capitol and the sense of humility and the effort that they have gone to is paying tremendous dividends for the state of Missouri, not just the university, but for the state of Missouri and for all of you. And so it's with the real celebration is, on March 1, I believe, you finished your first year,
I did. Dr.
Choi. And you also had a birthday in March?
Yes, I did.
And I do want to say that those of us who were involved, as many of us were here, in persuading Dr. Choi to become president of the university are more and more proud of our decision. And I want to say, Moon, thank you very much for your leadership and your work this past year. I might also add, though, you all understand it's hard to move to a new state and meet new people, and so I'm looking forward to Moon becoming more relaxed and a little more outgoing now that the first year is finished. I actually have a slide, if I could show it. How do we get that done? Now, the reason I want to talk about this very briefly with what we're doing today and some of the work that we're doing is to talk about a university and university governance. You know, there's always, if you look at that quote, there's always an allure to the authoritarian. People think it's easier. You know, you don't have to be the smartest or the most clever. You just have to have the biggest army or have the most money. And that's not real leadership. But we see from time to time in society that there's an allure to it. But those don't really work out, do they? If you look at authoritarian regimes through history, they have fallen, and democracies tend to be the surviving right now. And there's an interesting thinker called Steven Pinker who has a thought on that. And his thought is, all of us, no matter how smart we are or how much we know or how well educated we never know quite as much as we think we know. And we never are exactly right on things that we think we're exactly right on. And so what you have through the democratic process is we knock the rough edges off of each other. We have to listen. We're forced to listen. We're forced to compromise. We're forced to actually solve good decisions or make good decisions out of previously bad ideas sometimes. And if you think about the university, and one reason I love the university so much and the university setting so much is the university was really a democratic institution before democracy was cool. And sometimes I believe that those of you in the audience, the chancellors and the faculty and the administrators, don't really think that we on the Board of Curators understand or appreciate shared governance. And I can tell you that's wrong. We loved the faculty. I think I speak for the whole board. Didn't we love the faculty breakfast? And the fantastic ideas and the input from the faculty. We love that opportunity to learn from the faculty and from the students. Every board member is committed to shared governance. But I want you to look at that quote again. It says to govern is difficult. It doesn't say to govern is impossible. And it is my perspective as a Board of Curator member that sometimes we are too quick to say, well, it's higher education, so we can't do it. Or it's higher education, you just can't change. Would we have the discussion today on the task force, trying to figure out what the relationship is between the chancellors and the president and the campuses and the system and the Board of Curators? Our general counsel is going to be referring to documents from President Weaver in the 1960s. And you're going to see that the same problems we're wrestling with today are exactly the same problems that have been wrestled with by this institution for 50 years. And what I am going to suggest to you is that the world changes. We have social media we didn't have before. We have 24/7. We are being at the university squeezed by so many movements. You have new private operations like Launch Code that takes cohorts of non-traditional students and in 12, 14 weeks teaches them to code, and they can walk out of there and have good, high-paying jobs at $60,000. You've seen the percentage of industry that does their own education that they used to pay for MBAs and pay for education quadruple as they bring their continuing education in-house. You've seen the most highly sought-after credentials on LinkedIn no longer be bachelor's degrees, but be Amazon certification or Google certification. We're being disrupted, whether we know we're being disrupted or not. And when I say to rule is easy, to govern is difficult, it's not impossible, but it is difficult. And in the university setting, governing takes extraordinary leadership. It takes absolutely fearless leadership. I am sympathetic to the feedback and the pushback that comes from faculty sometimes when we talk about new online. And we have to be able to have much more candid conversations, which I hope is what we're going to do today, than we have ever had before. Now, I watched when Curator Chapman yesterday said, have we considered that we may not need 4 separate infrastructures for online on 4 separate campuses? Now, you all couldn't see your reactions, but I did. And we on the board saw that. We have to be able to change. Now, I'm not picking on anybody. We also heard on online how we can't scale. Then we heard from Klaus, who in fact has scaled right here at S&T by teaching 500 students. And I was talking to one of the professors, the history professor. We were talking about how hard it is to teach large classes, weren't we? But Klaus, using online technology and hybrid, has learned how to scale. And so we have to be more flexible and have those discussions in a lot of ways. Now, I have one more slide. And this is why I want to talk about with the group today and the task force today and what we're trying to do. Really to look at how we can be more than the sum of our parts and not less than the sum of our parts. All Henry Ford meant is that the world is going to change. We can be the same institution that we are, and we might last another 50 years. But we will not be a great university if we don't understand that the public wants us to build a better machine. We might not be able to have the same programs on all 4 campuses. We might not be able to have the same online infrastructure at all 4 campuses. I understand unique. I understand flavor, but I also understand the presentation made by our CFO, Ryan Rapp, yesterday. And so what this board is committed to do is to work with you on these changes. We are committed to work hard. We have probably more major tasks going than I've ever heard about. Curator Chapman is leading this task force where we start talking about lines of authority and our changes. The Curator Farmer has undertaken a new committee to talk about marketing and development. Curator Burnsick, with Ryan Rapp, is undertaking this huge process of the administrative review. Curator Sunvold is going to have some separate meetings to talk about a new healthcare system. This board is committed to working with you. But let me say, it's going to take a flip in our thinking. One thing that I will tell you I personally get frustrated with is when I hear, well, they're just protecting their campus, or they're just trying to protect their campus. We've got to flip our thinking. It can no longer be about protecting our campus. It has to be about protecting not just the university, but the higher ed in total. So I'm asking all of you, don't just be leaders in education. Don't just be leaders in your campus. Be leaders for the state of Missouri. Flip your thinking. Instead of thinking about my campus, and I'm not just picking on you, Alex, think about what your online platform can do for the other 3 campuses. Tom, thinking about your campus, you've done a better job with diversity than any other campus. Think about how that can be used with the other 3 campuses. To all of you, just try to have your first thought not be about my campus, but what I can do for the other 3 campuses. And we can be more than the sum of our parts. Higher education is not just teaching people to get jobs. It's teaching people how to have communities. It's teaching people how to resist the authoritarianism we see. What we do has consequences. And so I am challenging all of us, and it starts with me. We have to be more fearless, less risk-averse, more cooperative, more sacrificing for each other than we have ever been in the history of this university. And so as we go through this discussion today, I'm looking for a lot of disagreement, but I hope I also hear that disagreement in the spirit of looking towards what is good for the entire institution and the entire state. Thank you all.
Do I need to go through my report, or should we just end it there?
No. I'm trying to listen to Phil. You never know.
No, but in all seriousness, thank you, Chairman Steelman. There is no question that we are indeed facing a period of very exciting opportunities, but also tremendous challenges. And we recognize that we have to be innovative and bold. And sometimes we are going to make mistakes, but we're going to be reflecting on it, change course when it's necessary. But I'm also very fortunate that I have the opportunity to work with many outstanding servant leaders who put the university first. And they're sitting right in front of me. And together we are committed to lead the charge to change public higher education, not for the purpose of protecting the system or the campus, but to ensure that our students get the best education that they can, and that our faculty members perform the kind of research that would change the world, and the engagement that's necessary that shows the value that we provide to the citizens of Missouri each and every day. So I'm very pleased to introduce 2 new outstanding servant leaders who will be joining us. First is Christine Holt, and she is currently the Associate Vice Provost for the next 8 hours. And then a little longer, because she works weekends too, and she'll be starting as the Chief of Staff, working with me and all of the campus leaders to ensure that we meet our Missouri compacts in those critical areas. So Christine, welcome. Next is Dr. Mauli Agrawal, who is currently the interim provost at the University of Texas, San Antonio. He is an outstanding academic leader who's also a proven faculty, teacher, researcher. And he'll be working closely with Dr. Barbara Bickelmeyer to address some of the challenges that UMKC, like many public higher educational institutions, face, including academic program review, rebudgeting process, and to identify ways to strengthen the athletics program and its relationship to the university. But before I go on, I do want to thank Dr. Barbara Bickelmeyer, who has served tirelessly for the past 8 months as both chancellor and provost. And Dr. Bickelmeyer, on behalf of all of us, thank you for your commitment to our university. This slide shows our enrollment update and really demonstrates that our campus leaders have not been standing still. They've been very innovative. This shows the acceptances at each of our campuses, and I'm going to start with Mizzou because of the precipitous fall in enrollment that they've experienced during the past 2 years. Their applications have been up dramatically, and their acceptances are up 14.5% compared to last year. They now have more students now than last year on May 1st when the deadline occurred for acceptances. Now, there's much more work to do, no question about that. I also want you to see what's happening at other campuses, especially UMSL. They're up 30%, but their applications are up 37%. And the Missouri S&T right here, people recognize the value of the high-quality education that they receive at this university. And the transfer applications are up dramatically because of the new partnerships that have been established with the community college presidents. We are going to have more seamless transition programs to enable students to come to our universities and complete their bachelor's degree. But we're not done. There's a lot of work between now and May 1st to ensure that we have a high-quality class of students that we can bring in, educate, and to graduate them to become productive citizens in the state of Missouri. The next item is related to our budget, and I want you to focus on the House budget. The House, under the leadership of Todd Richardson, the Speaker, as well as Budget Chair Scott Fitzpatrick, introduced House Bill number 3, which restores our appropriations at a level that is current to this year, which means that they would have restored our budget that was cut in the governor's budget, as well as 10% of our performance funding that would have been at risk. The House recognized the value in public higher education and the fact that University of Missouri system contributes to not only workforce development, but economic development in the state. Also, the collaborative projects were funded at 60% and wrote into the core. The Senate, under the leadership of Senate President Ron Richard, as well as the Budget Chairman Dan Brown from right here in Rolla, have indicated to all of us that they value public higher education, and we believe that the core funding will be at least what it is in the House. On top of that, they are interested in funding our collaborative programs at the full 100%. There's a chance that it may remain in line items, but the important thing is that programs like the Springfield Medical Campus that trains medical doctors to practice in rural Missouri are just too valuable for this state not to make investments in. So we're very, very pleased about that. This is a slide that our CFO and Vice President Ryan Rapp shared with you yesterday. With the assumptions that you see on the top, with modest enrollment growth, 2% increase in tuition based on the limitations of Senate Bill 389, but also recognizing that we have to recognize our high-performing faculty and staff with performance increases. That given those assumptions, between now and 2023, we can see a recurring $160 million worth of a budget deficit each and every year. That's if we do nothing now. But we are not standing still. We are making dramatic transformations, including the academic portfolio review, administrative review, and other restructuring, not for the sake of efficiencies, but for the sake of transforming the way we deliver education, research, and extension. If we did nothing now, we are essentially throwing away our responsibilities as leaders at this university. And that 5 years from now, if we do nothing, we're going to make dramatic cuts that affect each and every one of our constituents. That is not where we want to be. So the next few years are going to be very difficult, but we are going to do this in a very thoughtful approach, recognizing that faculty, staff, and students are equity partners in all of this, working with the leadership and the Board of Curators. We all recognize that the high cost of education is something that we are very concerned about. And even though our tuition and fees are one of the lowest among public research universities in the country, we are actively seeking ways to reduce that cost. For a typical freshman, the average textbook cost is around $1,200 per year. If we can reduce that by 50%, 40%, it would benefit our students. Just to give an example of what that means, this past year we increased tuition throughout the University of Missouri system. That tuition increase amounted to $200 a year. Professor Klaus Volk transformed his course to use open access, in which textbooks now cost about $40, as opposed to $315 for that textbook. Just that one change for those students who are in that course, the increase in tuition was really subsumed by the decrease in the textbooks. Under the leadership of Steve Graham and Jill Wood, we've entered into a partnership with McGraw-Hill on using auto access, in which they'll make all of their textbooks available for $40 or less. In addition to that, we have more collaborations with OpenStax, which is a national organization, and faculty members are very excited. Look at the number of applications for open and affordable educational resources that we've been able to bring about. So this is something that we should celebrate, and we should continue to do for the benefit of our students and our faculty. I'm also very pleased to announce the Presidential Engagement Fellows. We have over 2,000 outstanding faculty throughout the state of Missouri. I say throughout the state of Missouri because this also counts the extension faculty. And these faculty members are not only performing research that makes the difference to Missourians, but it's research that has the broader impact of affecting Missouri citizens. And they will be going out, these 20 individuals from each of our campuses will be going out to different parts of the state to talk about the research in the context of the public good. And I believe that we have several of these Presidential Engagement Fellows here. And if you're in the audience, can I ask you to stand? Thank you. That's Professor Diana Ahmad, who is here from Rolla. Thank you. In terms of highlights from the campuses, our most important efforts are centered around engagement, extension, research, and student success. And I'll talk to you about these three topics in the context of what we do in each of our campus. This project, which funds the UMSO initiative from the Kearns Foundation, educates teachers to become more effective teachers in K through 12 settings. The saying goes, if you can educate a teacher to educate others, our impact can be enhanced dramatically. And these are faculty members who perform research, but also they want to translate that to make a difference in the classroom. I do want to thank the PIs on this effort, and they are Marvin Berkowitz as well as Melinda Beer. And these types of programs, whether it's a math and science partnership, Project Lead the Way, or the Bridge program, really increases our impact in the communities. This slide highlights the emphasis that we place at a university on high quality teaching. This is an award that was made to Kathleen Unrath, who is a professor in the School of Education. And there is a false dichotomy that we hear about at many research universities, that faculty members who perform research do not care about teaching as much as they should. I believe that there are some outliers in which that is true, and we have to educate them. But the great majority of our faculty members' teaching is informed by their innovative research, and this is no exception. And Professor Unrath has been awarded the Governor's Award for Outstanding Teaching, and this is something that we should celebrate, while at the same time, as educators and as leaders, we need to address poor teaching. For the benefit of our students, we need to come together and find effective ways to do that. At UMKC, we recently announced through the work of Professor Anthony Caruso 2 major grants, $15 million in support from DoD to address the asynchronous threat that comes from drones. And it is a technology that is used as anti-drone technologies to attack drones that may be used for efforts to compromise military maneuvers, or efforts in which drones are used as low-cost options for delivering chemical payloads. This is going to be a major problem in the future, and to be able to address those using modern technologies like the ones that are being developed here is very important. What's also very satisfying for me that I'm pleased about is that this is a partnership among 3 of our campuses between S&T, UMKC, and Mizzou, and we need to develop more partnerships like this. The last slide reflects the work of Professor Risheng Wang, and she is developing a very innovative way in which drugs and pharmaceuticals can be embedded into DNA to deliver targeted, low-dose drugs that can be used for advanced treatments of cancer and other diseases. And this is the future of medicine, and that is why for the University of Missouri system, translational precision medicine is going to be a major, major emphasis for all of us. And I believe that there are opportunities for all of our faculty members to be able to participate in this very important effort. So thank you, Chairman Steelman. That concludes my report. If there are any questions or comments from the board, I'd be happy to entertain them.
No questions? No comments?
Okay.
You dodged the bullet.
Thank you.
Now we have, Chris, are you doing it? Okay. Interim Chancellor Maples will present the Missouri University of Science and Technology's strategic plan highlights. Okay. I only read what Cindy writes.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to be turning this over to a couple of different people at a couple of different times. First and foremost, we're delighted that you're here at Rolla. We're delighted that you had a chance to visit the campus. And for those of you who attended our dinner last night and got to interact with our students, I can only tell you that if you probably share my experience to a certain extent. I'm really glad I'm not competing with these guys today, frankly. I'm not sure I would survive. When I first got here, one of the earliest meetings I had was a dinner meeting with the mayor and city manager. And I asked the mayor and city manager about the connection with the university and town. And they talked a lot about the Celebration of Nations parade, which is fantastic, and it's a wonderful thing. And they said how great it was to tie the university together. And I asked them, I said, yeah, and I heard that St. Patrick's Day is a really big deal here too. And they reiterated that the Celebration of Nations was great. But they also embraced and thanked us for the St. Patrick's and all of that goes on. But one of the questions I asked them, and one of the things I learned early on being president of a university for 8 years myself, is I asked them, is Rolla a university town or a town with a university in it? And in many respects, we got into a really nice long conversation about that, about how there's much more of a reconnection with the university. We've been here almost 150 years. We will celebrate our sesquicentennial in 2020, 2021. And so that reconnection is a really important thing. What you are hearing from the Board of Curators, is the scaling of that up. Is Missouri a state with a university in it? Or is it a university that serves the entire state and is part of what the state really is and is part of that state DNA? And so what you're going to hear from me today is a little bit of that scaling from the university, from the campus perspective of S&T and how we scale some of these connections. This cover slide shows a scene from, it doesn't show a scene from anything, wait a minute. Now it shows a scene from last June's Makers Fair in Kansas City. which was a tremendous event. Missouri S&T was a lead sponsor there. The types of children who attend Makers Fairs are the kinds of kids whose curiosity about science, engineering, and making things often leads them to STEM-focused areas. And I will tell you, our Mars rover was a huge hit at this particular event. It was a big deal. What we want children to know is about the great offerings, not just at Missouri S&T, but STEM fields in general and what they can do going forward. And I hope I'm hitting this the right way. Yes. Our on-campus summer camps are really an important way that we introduce a lot of K through 12 students to science, technology, engineering concepts. Here you see a number of kids launching a water rocket. It is a water rocket. And learning about aerospace engineering at our very popular aerospace camp. We really love when children come to our campus to learn, but a lot of times we go into the communities as well. One example here is our partnership with the Kaleidoscope Discovery Center in town. We recently signed an MOU with Kaleidoscope. It is a community-driven learning center with substantial investments by private individuals. Missouri S&T is also the state's Project Lead the Way affiliate. For those of you who were in the Faculty Senate breakfast, you heard some details and saw some really good information about Project Lead the Way and the kinds of ways that we participate in that. My previous institution, Oregon Institute of Technology, was the state's Project Lead the Way affiliate for Oregon. And so there's been a huge and deep commitment to getting this kind of information out to kids. So each summer we have 600 or more pre-college teachers attending our workshops to learn how Project Lead the Way works in their classrooms. And over the years, in talking to a lot of teachers, they will tell me that there are lots of materials out there. What they want help with, what they need help with is how they make those materials work for them in the classrooms. And that's a huge amount of what Project Lead the Way helps them to do. Fort Leonard Wood, our nearby Army Air Base, our Army base is part of a regional community and partner in several research projects. Most recently, we joined Fort Leonard Wood and Phelps County Regional Medical Health Center as partners to study the acute effects of neurotrauma, and that is basically traumatic brain injury. And we're working to have the military better understand traumatic brain injury, the early symptoms of it, and how to treat soldiers who may sustain brain injuries in the field or even during boot camp. We will be signing a memorandum of understanding with the Merrimack Regional Planning Commission to articulate our shared work in community development. And last but not least, several of our students dive into community improvement and planning projects in Missouri towns as part of our partnership with Regional Planning Commission. So, with that, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce Dr. Joan Schumann to speak more about this project with the partnerships and regional planning commissions. Dr. Schumann is an associate teaching professor of engineering management and systems engineering here, and she will give you a feeling for this kind of scaling up and level of partnership that we have. Joan, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am happy to be here to talk to you about my class, and I thank Dr. Maples for this opportunity. How many of you have heard the term service learning? You familiar? Some of you have. I see this as a teaching strategy which encompasses community service with classroom learning and reflection. So the idea behind this is that students learn techniques in class, and then they utilize what they've learned to provide meaningful community service. Hopefully that enhances their learning, teaches civic responsibility, and strengthens our communities. That's the goal of this. So I'm really excited that I get to do this in one class. So my service learning class is Introduction to Project Management. And this is an undergraduate class that's geared toward junior and senior level engineering students. Most of the students that I get are engineering management. They're in my department because it's a core class in my curriculum, but I get a lot of students that are from other engineering disciplines, and occasionally I get some that are outside the engineering school. So These students work on different projects. We started by partnering with the Merrimack Regional Planning Commission. Bonnie Prigge, who is the executive director, identifies communities that want to work with my class. And then we sit down with them before the semester begins. We talk about where they want to go with their communities, what vision they have for their communities, and we try to flesh out projects, 10 to 12 projects per community for the students to work on to help them reach those goals. So my students then are assigned projects, and they create a project plan for those projects. That includes a conceptual design, it includes schedule, budget, and some other things. Now, many of the community members that we work with don't have the expertise to create these project plans. If they went out of house to hire this work done, it would cost them between $10,000 and $20,000 per project. That's the service that we provide to them, but it's more than that. It's the idea that they get fresh, young eyes to look at these projects and come up with ideas that maybe they hadn't thought of. And I hear this over and over for them. Wow, we've never thought about that. So it's energizing to the community members, and they get really excited about that, and I've seen this over and over. So that's part of the service that we also provide. My students get the chance to work on real projects. They have a real client. They have to travel to the communities several times during the semester. They meet with the community leaders. They elicit requirements about the projects. They get frustrated. They solve problems. It is an extremely growing opportunity for them, and I think it's very beneficial. Many of them highlight this on their resumes. They use this when they talk to future employers, so I know that it is beneficial to them. I know it adds value, and it does provide them opportunities in the future. I also hope that they take this as a way to become more civic-minded when they go into new communities. So I talk a lot about building communities and what that takes to do, and so hopefully that is what they take with them when they leave the university as well. So once we finish the projects, my class travels to the community that we're working with. We sit down, we share a meal with the community leaders and the community members that are invited, and then the students present their project plans. Next week, we travel to the city of Owensville, and my students will present their final project plans. That means at that point, we will have created 189 project plans for 16 different communities in the Merrimack region. I would like to be able to stand here and tell you that all of those 189 plans have been completed, but in most small communities, funding is always the limiting factor, and so they're working on that. They work with the Planning Commission to try to identify areas where they can get funding and move forward with that. We've probably completed about 10% or so. I'd like it to be higher than that, but that's where we are. So what we would like to do in the future is maybe expand out into other regions, not just the Merrimack region. With the help of Elizabeth Smith, maybe work with some other planning commissions around the state. That is a little bit more of a challenge for us because of the distance of travel, but I think through technology we can make that happen. I would also like to my goal is to be able to write some grants, find some funding, and actually execute one project per year. Working with the local engineering firm and students, maybe have them work with them and see how to execute a project. I think that would be incredibly valuable to them and obviously very valuable to the communities as well. So that's my future plans. Hadn't figured out quite exactly how to do that, but that's the direction that I would like to go with this class. I thank you.
Will you take questions? What you've done organically here and seem to be growing so well sounds a lot like what many universities have engaged in called Enactus. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Enactus originally was called Students in Free Enterprise, and its origin is in Springfield, Missouri. And they now have over 100 universities that compete just what you're talking about. They take their projects and they make presentations. It's now international.
Awesome.
And it might add a dimension. I don't think it's competitive with you in that the dimension it might add would be to take what you're doing and enter teams or a team in that. UMKC has been doing this for a number of years, and they just this week won the regional competition and will go on to nationals. So Barbara Bickelmeyer will know all about this, and you might visit with her. I think it would be a fascinating next step for your program.
Absolutely, that sounds very exciting to me. The students like a little competition.
Yes.
Other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Joan. And now I'm going to briefly sort of introduce business development and highlight our I-Corps program. Missouri S&T is really happy to be participating in the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corps, or I-Corps program. It's an entrepreneurial education program backed by federal money from National Science Foundation. We currently have a team of 5 students who are competing in Minneapolis right now in a national entrepreneurship competition named eFest. There were several schools from Missouri that entered. We were the only one in the final 25 that are in Minneapolis. Other schools that are there, just to get a feeling for it, include Drexel, Virginia, GW, Binghamton, USC, Minnesota, Wisconsin. So this is a national and really solid team. Our team, called Spark, all the teams have names, will be competing, and we'll know results by Monday, I believe, because they're right in the middle of this. Through I-Corps, Missouri-based entrepreneurs can earn funding while working at Missouri S&T Business, working with Missouri S&T business experts to transform their ideas into new technologies that benefit society. I-Corps works to move academic and student inventors into entrepreneurship by training STEM inventors to gather and respond to market demands, and not make that mistake that so many places make, where they're trying to create the market while creating the really cool idea. Participants learn how to seek, receive, and integrate critical suggestion and direction. This program also involves non-academic participants around Missouri, and in our own community, I-Corps is working with people through the Kaleidoscope Discovery Center. And again, for those of you who were at the event last night, you may have run into several of the leaders of the local Kaleidoscope Discovery Center and the Merrimack Regional Planning Commission. And I would now like to introduce Cheyenne Paudel, who's going to come up here eventually. You have to come up here. Cheyenne earned his bachelor's degree in economics and master's degree in chemical engineering, both from Missouri S&T. He's a graduate student pursuing his PhD in chemical engineering and works as a process engineer at Brewer Science here in Raleigh. Cheyenne will speak about his research with Dr. Joseph Smith as part of the I-Corps program. Dr. Smith is the Laufer Endowed Energy Chair and a professor of chemical and biochemical engineering here at S&T. His research focuses on renewable energy resources. In their I-Corps research, Cheyenne and Dr. Smith are researching a cost-effective, sustainable way to recycle waste cooking oil into biodiesel fuel, with the goal of creating a recycling project that could be replicated in several towns and cities across Missouri and elsewhere. So Cheyenne, you're on.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I have never given a presentation in front of Board of Curators. In fact, I didn't know what that meant, so I had to look it up. So I know who you are now. I'm honored to be here today and share my experience with the National I-Corps program. My name is Cheyenne Paudel. I was born in Nepal. Nepal is a beautiful country in the Himalayas. I was born in a little village of Karkineda in the mountains of western Nepal. When I was 18 years old, I came to the United States. I got my Bachelor's of Science degree from University of Central Missouri in Warrensburg, Missouri. Then I came to MSNT to get my Master's in Chemical Engineering. Ever since I came to SNT, I have been working with Dr. Joseph Smith. Dr. Joseph Smith came up with the idea of converting the waste cooking oil using a novel technology to biodiesel. While working with him, I got the opportunity to work with Dr. Greg Ellis from the economics department, and also Dr. Booney Bachman, who runs the National I-Course program here at SNT. I was enrolled for experiential entrepreneurship class taught by Dr. Bachman in economics. And for that class, we were trying to come up with some ideas that, and we wanted to understand the business side of that idea. Now, Dr. Smith and I have been working on this, so we knew the technical part of this idea. However, we did not know the business side. That was a perfect beginning, and Dr. Bachman's experiential entrepreneurship class made my team ready to go to the National I-Course. The National Science Foundation, the I-Course program, bring the technologies in the university to the community and business. By profession, engineers are known to be very quiet. They get really excited about the technology. However, they are hesitant to go outside to the market and try to understand if there is a market potential or not. So for the I-Course program, we set a team. The team consists of Dr. Joseph Smith, he's the academic lead, Dr. Greg Lehman from the Baylor University in Texas, and I. Dr. Smith brings the technical expertise. Dr. Lehman brings the business expertise, and I'm the entrepreneur lead. The 7 weeks long I-Course program consisted the 3-day beginning workshop in Denver, Colorado for our team. At that workshop, there were 20 teams from all over the United States. These teams, on the first 3 days of the workshop, were taught very of the skills that are necessary to understand the customer discovery process. It was facilitated by the teaching teams, which have run such projects many times before. The teaching teams were very, very harsh for the students, but they were very direct. They taught us the interview skills that were necessary for the customer discovery. During that process, the team members were asked to get out of the building and talk to the real customers. When I say the customers, for example, in my case, our project was to use waste cooking oil to make biodiesel. On that process, I talked to a total of 130 customers. The customers starts from the place where they produce waste cooking oil. That would be the restaurants like KFC, McDonald's, and mom and pop stores. Then after that, we talk about the collectors who collect the waste cooking oil from them. Then after that, we talk to people who, what do they do with it? So we start making phone calls and visiting this place every week. It was a very intensive process, especially because I was the only student for the team. On our weekly meetings, we had to update the teaching team. We used to have the weekly web-based meetings, and on those teams, if you do not have the results, if you do not have good results, then you'll be in this spot. And the audience there are very, very smart, technically smart, and also very talented people. So it's kind of difficult situation. However, the learning I have gained from there have been very life learning. So a few of the skills that I have learned from the I-Course is that I have learned to listen. I have learned to listen what people have to say. I tend to be talkative and not let other people speak. But during the I-Course process, they taught me your technology is not important. the important is there a problem? So for me to find if there is, my technology serves the customer, I have to let the customer speak. I have to try to understand if I'm solving a problem that is worth solving. Let me share with you an incident. There was a time I really needed to talk to a waste vegetable oil collector in a St. Louis, Missouri area. I gave them several phone calls. I wanted to talk to the guy who runs the business. I wanted to talk to the CEO for 5 minutes. I tried for a couple of days. The secretary said she would call me back. She never did. So the next morning, I showed up at their facility, and I was talking to the secretary, asking for that 5 minutes, because the information I was looking for, I wanted it to be a reliable information coming from the guy who had ran the business for a long time. I was kicked out of the building. This particular incident taught me the reality about life and the necessary persistence that is needed to be successful in business. The weekly presentations also provided feedback, and they provided criticism, and I learned the skills to incorporate their feedback on my projects. So in summary, I learned lifelong lessons through iCurbs. The opportunity with iCurbs have changed the way I look at my PhD research now. iCurbs has been a wonderful experience and the best part of being here at S&T. I know with the knowledge and training I'm getting at S&T, very soon I'll be able to start a business in a rural village of Karkineta in the mountains of Nepal. Thank you.
Any questions? That was really an impressive presentation. Thank you.
No questions, but that's really an inspiring story, and I applaud you for your persistence in putting together this team and moving an idea forward. That takes a lot of work.
Thank you.
Any other comments? We're very grateful to you for sharing that story.
Thanks, Cheyenne, very much. There you have it. When I had graduate students, when I got to be faculty myself, one of the things I used to surprise my own graduate students with on a regular basis when they would bring projects into me is I'd go, who cares? This is very much a who cares. This is very much the relevance. This is very much the connection to be part of the state, part of the region, not just something in it. And it's something that we take very seriously. And I really do appreciate the comment about the listening skills too, because there's an outtake from part of Pulp Fiction that's not in the actual movie. And one of those outtakes is Uma Thurman's character interviewing Vince before going out with him. And the question is, in conversation, are you actually listening, or are you just waiting on your turn to talk? And Vince replies that well, you know, a lot of times he's just waiting on his turn to talk, but he's working on it. So I like the listening part of that. That's how you find out the relevance. That's how we are working collectively to find out what's needed in the state. How are we doing this? And we greatly appreciate your leadership in this and greatly appreciate the chance to show you a little bit about what we do here. So thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to go now what we call the critical issue discussion, which was started by Curator Graham when he was chairman, and where we're trying to actually have better discussions and make substantive decisions about issues. And today it's going to be turned over to Daryl Chapman, who has been chairing the task force as we try to determine what the system means and what are the roles of the campuses and the system and the president, the chancellors, the boards, et cetera. Before Daryl starts, anybody who has had the courage to sit in here today is welcome to have a comment. This is not just for the Board of Curators. It's not just for the people, the general officers sitting at these tables. Heck, Rudy, if you want to say something, you can. We welcome any of you, any discussions. I hope we all understand that we're here to disagree respectfully or to agree and have a vigorous discussion. Let me say one more thing. What we're trying to do is work through what the board wants to see happen on moving forward on the issues. We look at the task force, which is Curators Chapman, Burnsick, Phillips, Steve Owen, Ryan Rapp, and each of the chancellors. I hope I haven't left somebody out. Terry McTaggart, and Moon Choi, I can't leave Dr. Choi out. Terry McTaggart is here. We appreciate their work, but the board needs to make a decision as to how we want to move forward, leading to using our development session in whatever length of time we need to decide if we want to pass new CRRs, if we want to change things, what sort of principles we want to adopt. We are really looking to try to resolve some 50-year-old questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Chairman Chapman, who's been working very hard on this.
All right, thanks, Dave. And I echo some of the things, or all the things that Dave said. I want to also thank Cindy Harmon for all of her hard work, Nick Beidler, and I'm not sure if Steve got mentioned either, but all the people that Dave mentioned, including those folks, participated a lot in this effort. So our goals, I want to talk a little bit about that. Our ultimate goal in this is increasing or improving student success, developing processes, procedures, governance structures that all improve student success and improve the student experience. We also had other goals, including increasing collaboration across campuses, increasing efficiency, decreasing duplication, and all of this was premised upon a collective rule that Steve told me about early in this process that states that the University of Missouri shall be one university. And this process will help us to define exactly what that means. So today, we're going to start off with a history of Collective Rule 20.010. Steve's going to do that for us. Terry's going to lead a discussion. And as Dave said, we want everyone in this room to speak up. If you have any questions or comments, please do so. But we're going to have a discussion and where we talk about his research and some of the topics and issues raised by the task force during our multiple discussions that we had over the last few months. Then Nick is going to present his research on shared services. We identified, or the task force identified, shared services as something that we could do right now. Nick's got some really good ideas and research based upon that topic. So in the spirit of shared governance, as we move through this process, we're going to take the ideas that we get from the discussion today, along with a report that Terry has that's more comprehensive, and we're going to create a council of chancellors and a council of provosts. And in the spirit of shared governance, we want the chancellors and provosts to do some critical discussion, some critical thought, and come up with some recommendations based upon our discussion today, and present some of those recommendations and thoughts to the board at our June 22nd meeting. So with no further ado, I will hand it over to Steve so that he can give us some background on Collective Rule 20.010, the one university rule.
Well, thank you, Curator Chapman, and thank you for the opportunity to research this rule, the opportunity to research some university history and something regarding governance was a good opportunity, and I appreciate it. And it's produced some interesting results. Let me say before I start that I rely primarily, in terms of the history of the rule, I rely primarily on the memoirs of Presidents Elmer Ellis, C. Bryce Ratchford, and James Olson. So that's where we kind of get the history of this particular rule. And I'll be working off this packet that was both sent out to the board and is also placed in front of you. It's a packet that the top document is entitled History of the Development of CRR 20.010. The second document in your packet is the rule itself that we call sometimes the one university rule. And let me just read it because that's our starting point. it says that the board, this is written in 1967, the board reaffirms the basic concept that the University of Missouri shall be one university. And this one university concept requires a centrally directed and unified administration and operation. And the board reaffirms the authority already granted to the president to direct the manner of implementation of this concept. And the board expects full cooperation of all university and campus staff to carry out this general policy. And the board directs that in the consideration and drafting of proposed rules and regulations, that such a concept be followed. So that is the one university concept that's embodied in CRR 20.010. It was adopted by the board in June of 1967, and it's still in place today. So what can we learn from the historical context in which the rule was adopted? And I think in order to understand the historical context of 1967, you actually have to go back a few years to when the university or the university system was formed in 1963. So prior to 1963, the university consisted of the campus in Columbia and one of its schools, which was the Rolla School of Mines in Rolla. The president at the time in 1963 was Elmer Ellis. And Ellis strongly believed that the University of Missouri had a statewide mission. It wasn't just for mid-Missouri. And as he looked around the state, he realized that there was no University of Missouri presence. In fact, there was really no strong public higher education presence in the major metropolitan areas of St. Louis and Kansas City. In fact, it's believed that at that point in time, those were the two largest major metropolitan areas in the country without a significant public higher education presence. So in 1963, through a variety of efforts, Ellis put together the university system, which consisted then of the University of Kansas City, a private institution, joining the University of Missouri, and a Normandy Junior College being elevated and becoming eventually the University of Missouri at St. Louis, and Rolla no longer just a school or division of the Columbia campus, but becoming a university in and of itself. So Ellis took these four universities and organized them as a university system, which was kind of a trend at the time, although we were probably towards the front end of the trend. In doing so, there was no blueprint, there was no master plan, there was no strategic plan. The goals, according to the historians, don't seem to be much more than establish public universities in Kansas City and St. Louis and serve those populations, to acquire additional political support by having a presence in those cities, and to achieve some economies of scale. In fact, if you read James Olson's memoirs, he says the following. He says, there were few models at the time for a multi-campus university, but generally the university followed patterns developed in California and North Carolina. Neither President Ellis nor the Board of Curators had developed a formal plan for operating the university as a multi-campus institution. They had consulted with William Friday, president of the University of North Carolina, and with representatives of the University of California, but had established no organized planning process. Olson observes regarding Ellis, he says, Ellis was a skilled and canny administrator who worked well with a minimum of structure. And with the concurrence of the board, he put the system together on an ad hoc and at times quite informal basis. And that's how it operated. That's how it was formed in '63, and that's how it operated for the first 3 years of its existence until 1966, when Ellis had to retire pursuant to mandatory retirement rules. And so the board did a search, and they searched for a new system president. At the time, it was believed that the MU chancellor, John Schwada, was the favorite. In fact, historians will note that Schwada thought he was the favorite. But they ended up hiring John Weaver from Ohio State. And in hiring Weaver, the board gave him some specific instructions, and those are set forth to some degree in the first page of the history of the development document. But the board made clear to Weaver that the board wanted Weaver to, quote, formalize the system. The board also was of the, quote, firm view that the University of Missouri was not a federation of semi-autonomous institutions, but a single university with multiple locations. And the board expected strong presidential leadership from Weaver. Weaver was hired in September of 1966. His inaugural ceremony was not until April of '67. And in his inaugural address, he gives some indication of what his thoughts were on the formation of the system, and those are excerpted in the second document in your packet. But in his address, and I won't read it all, but let me read some pertinent parts. In his address, he says, "My reading of the intent of Missouri is that this multi-campus university is not to be managed as a loose federation of quasi-independent institutions, but rather as a strongly united and single entity. Reflecting differences in local environment, history, and stages of development, the several campuses will, I am sure, always retain many features of unique character. Such diversity will add overall richness to the total university. Nonetheless, the University of Missouri should seek as one institution, residing in 4 locations, to achieve a reality of common requirements, standards, ideals, and coordinated purposes wherever its flag may fly. 8 months among the statewide operations of this university lead me to echo the words from Hiawatha, quote, 'All your strength is in your union, all your danger is in your discord.'" And that was from his inaugural address that was in April of 1967, 2 months before the board adopted the one university policy. The board did adopt that on June 25, 1967, and 2 days later, Weaver wrote a memo to the campus chancellors and the system officers, and it's a remarkable memo. Those of you who have had an opportunity to read it, I think have all remarked it reads as though it was written yesterday. And before I go through that document, first let me say thanks to Cindy Harmon and her office for going through the archives and boxes and finding the document. Also, let me point out to Curator Farmer that of the addressees in this document, one of them is the new system director for alumni relations and fundraising. That when Weaver looked at the system and formed the offices and officers, he felt the system had a role in fundraising. So let's look at some of the excerpts of the document. I've likened this to scripture. There's something for everyone. But as he said, he's writing the letter to his chancellors and his vice presidents because there have been misunderstandings and differences of opinion. And he goes on to say that the University of Missouri cannot move forward unless these misunderstandings and differences are promptly clarified, and unless all persons involved can now unite behind common policy. Not only must our unity be based on a clear understanding of the basic purposes involved, but also on strong individual commitment to cooperation and mutual concern in achieving the intent and spirit of these concepts. I think it's telling that on the second page, he speaks to what I believe are relationships and culture. And he says, hard and fast lines of specific and minutely defined authority are not needed in the presence of common intent, trust, adequate interpersonal relations, and mutual confidence. He goes on to say we cannot expect instant solution to all of our problems, but by working as a closely related team within which individuals are always ready to put the common good above personal differences, we can, I am confident, make progress. He also says on page 3, and I think this is important, and this is also consistent with Chairman Steelman's comments this morning. Weaver says, it is clearly the board's conviction, and it is one in which I share, that the University of Missouri is a meaningful entity that consists of more than the simple sum of its 4 campuses. This fact alone makes it imperative that the administrative officers charged with responsibility for the total university, meaning the system officers, have access to the campus domain whenever and wherever they may deem it necessary to perform the ultimate responsibilities in coordination and operation. These dual administrative needs, he says, and functions can certainly exist and interact effectively side by side in the hands of what he said were men of goodwill. The other important aspect, I think, of this memo is that he addresses the role of the faculty, and I know that the task force of time to time has talked about what is the role of the faculty as we look at system structure. And Weaver says, further he said, let me make clear that nothing in the board resolution regarding one university or in this letter in any way changes the role of the faculty. We must seek additional ways in which the several faculties can achieve more intimate knowledge of one another and have the opportunity to develop common goals and approaches to university-wide academic problems. Certainly, there is ample room for individual campus innovation, adjustment to local circumstances and surrounding environment, and unique identity. So let me see real quickly if I can do my best to summarize what I believe was the intent of the rule at the time in 1967. And first, it was that by being organized as a system, the university should be more than the sum of its 4 campuses. That the university was not to be a federation of semi-autonomous institutions, but a single university. That it was a strong system, that it was meant to be a strong system of centralized administrative services with a strong president. That clarity of purpose and clarity of expectations are important, and there should be no misunderstandings regarding that. That common intent, relationships, and culture are more important than structure and rules. That within the system, there is room for individual campuses to reflect differences in local environment, in history, in stages of development, in innovation, and in identity. And that the rule and Weaver's letter do not affect the role of the faculty, but we must seek more ways for faculty to collaborate across the campuses. So let me sum up, say in conclusion, let's be clear, I believe that was the intent of the rule in 1967. What we should be doing today might be different. Maybe we can learn some lessons from 1967, maybe we want to discard the rule, but that seems to be the focus of this task force, which I think is no longer whether there should be a system, but given that there's a system, how can we get more out of being a system?
Thank you, Steve. Very important information from a historical perspective. Shines light on some of the issues that we face today. And thank you for the research. Really appreciate it, Steve and Cindy. Good job. Any questions? We'll move forward with Terry. Terry, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Well, I have a comment. I guess I'd say I agree with everything that Steve has said. I'm alarmed at the emphasis on the words "one university." What he read to us was that concept was adopted with no plan. This is not like a living constitution. The plan came 3 years later, and one university means different things to different people. To have spent 15 minutes reinstilling an ambiguous phrase causes me great concern. And I need to tell you, the audience, my background is 11 degrees from the University of Missouri at Columbia. I've got no degrees in my near family at S&T or UMKC or St. Louis. But I have an appreciation for the uniqueness and the centers of excellence at each of those campuses. And I can assure you that the alumni from those campuses will be quite alarmed when they hear the term one university. So I'm sounding the alarm at this point. I am, among all of the curators, I think most in favor of having collaboration between the campuses and a strong system management for shared services and for strategy, but not for preempting the roles of each campus. That's not meaning that they need to be semi-autonomous. It needs to mean that they need to be respected and that we not alienate the faculty and the teachers on the other campuses. So I just wanted to get that comment in early.
That's a great comment. Any other comments? Okay, that's going to be at the heart of the debate here, or probably at the heart of the discussion. So Terry, go ahead and proceed.
Thank you, Darrell. Thank you, Trustee Phillips. Thank you, Steve, for the wonderful history. Congratulations to the task force members. When this thing started, I didn't think there'd be any consensus by the end of it. That's maybe half true, but there's a lot of work been accomplished, and there should be a good, robust interchange today. And we just got a little prelude of it, so that's terrific. Let me make apologies to the folks back there who can't see what's on the flip chart here. It's pretty much an abbreviated form what you can see on the slide, so you won't miss anything in that respect. It just makes the conversation here a little bit easier to have it on a flip chart. In the time we have, I'd like to focus on 3 questions, okay? All of which have been suggested, adumbrated in the foregoing conversation. Why are we doing this thing? What's wrong with the way it is now? Why don't we just leave it as it is? Okay, that can be, I think, a fairly brief discussion because I think there is consensus, as the chair articulated so well a little while ago, the need for some change. The second is, what are the changes on the table? And we've got those depicted in slides, and I'll work through them as well. And fundamentally, that's under the heading of, what do we mean by one university? Okay, as John Phillips just outlined. And then finally, where do you want the task force to go from here? Frankly, I hope your recommendation will be to continue to march in anticipation of your June and July meetings, where there'll be deeper discussion, more detail, and ultimately confirmation of some new approach and better defined approach to the system. But those are the 3 questions. My job as your facilitator is to kind of keep us on track, but particularly make sure we get to that 3rd one before we adjourn for the day or for the, cool? Is that okay? Works? Okay. Here's what was, and whoever's managing the slides, if they can go to there it is. Thank you very much. I've summarized what's on that slide right here. Why are we doing this? Most of the institutions, most of the systems in the country, and I would say 80% of them are engaged in an activity something like what you're engaged in right now. Most of them feel that they're driven primarily by finances and the lack thereof. Okay? Your task force identified a couple of others. We want to get better. We're good right now, and the presentations you've heard in the last few days confirm that, but we want to get better. We want to become even more excellent for our faculty, for our academic programs, our students, and our staff. Student success is underlined. How can we use, for example, investments in AI to enable our students to be more effective in their studies and for the faculty and staff to help them more along the way? You're a research university. You're not backing away from that at all. Money is an issue, and the president's presentation earlier underscores that. But if you just wanted to save money, frankly, there are a lot easier ways to do it than the kind of transformation that you're talking about here. And then finally, a word I picked up from my colleagues in Minnesota who've been at this for 20 years, greater functionality, greater effectiveness in administrative services. Okay. Let me just pause there. Is there a general consensus from the chancellors, from the curators, from anybody who cares to comment from the audience, that these are worthwhile aspirations, and as this thing gets going, you're going to look back at these and say, okay, have we made improvements in areas like these? Or have we just made some administrative changes without substantive improvement? So let me stop there.
Any questions from anybody on what we're doing?
Yeah, Barbara.
I'll go ahead and be bold here. I would like to see in here that we need to pursue these changes in order to clarify how we're the same and how we're different, and what University Hall does to lead and support us.
Frankly, just given the time and one hand is occupied with the mic, I'm not going to write that out, but it is a wonderful addition, and thank you for that. And as a theme coming as no surprise to anybody in this room will be, how do we get the balanced leadership where the system can be proactive, anticipating the future, working with the chancellors and obviously with their teams and their campuses to move this thing forward. It's not a completely laissez-faire operation on the one hand, which frankly, more or less, it looks to me like it has been in the past, but nor is it a top-down oligarchy.
And
that's the secret to this. Darrell.
I want to make the point too, this isn't an exercise targeted towards our campuses. I want to hear input from our campuses on what the system and what the folks over in University Hall can do better, and the curators can do better as well, because we have a role and also the campuses have a role too, so leave it at that.
This won't be the last conversation. This may be the first collective conversation.
Exactly.
Right? Yes. Michelle.
I would like just to make an observation
Okay.
that over the last few years that I've been watching this, I believe the most important thing that we have clarity about is the need to really have a vision and where we're going. And I believe that's very much taking shape. And that's why I think we'll be able to address our issues and transform. And I think in the past, that's what's been missing, is a consistent, solid vision and direction that everyone can then be unique and different in following.
Terrific. I've heard that sometimes in the past the campuses might say, well, that's a nice idea the system has. We appreciate the input, and go their own way. And you're talking about a more integrated approach to these important topics. Yeah. Okay. Plenty of opportunity for input in the next couple of months, but this would be sort of the guiding aspiration. Number 2, changes that are on the table for discussion. These aren't crisp proposals for exactly how the system should go forward, seeking a yay or nay vote. Ideas to be discussed. And they fall into 3 categories. The organization of the system itself, and that is, what does it mean to be a one university in 2018 and going forward. Second, some comments on system culture. By that I mean how people work together, how authority is exercised, how shared governance works, but doesn't stymie decisions and action. And the third category are 5 specific initiatives that the task force believes, frankly, are worth pursuing and invites your comment on. So the next part of this conversation will be under those 3 headings. System organization, one university means. I think maybe the best way to proceed with this is let me run through each one very quickly, because I've abbreviated here and might need an explanation or 2. And then let's take them one at a time and see where your best thinking, your guts and your brains tell you ought to go. Your current setup, as you know, is you have a president, system head in Dr. Choi. The other alternative is that Alex would be, for example, would be head of the system as well as the flagship institution. That's the way the University of Minnesota does it. That's the way the University of Michigan does it. So one option out there would be, should we switch to the flagship model, which you don't have now, right? You've got an executive for the whole system and 4 campuses. Or should you change to this? The second one, and this is all designed to give a little sharper collective understanding of what it means to be one university these days. Should the vice chancellors report directly to the vice presidents? That's the way they do it now in the University of Maine system, where I've spent a fair amount of time, and some others. Okay, is that a good way to go, or is that diminishing the accountability and authority of the chancellors excessively? If anybody wants my opinion on these, I will share it, and as well as what practice across the country is. but this is for your conversation. Does it change your authority at all? The kind of thing we're talking about. Okay? Does, it would, for example, would some curators be assigned to kind of oversee or be governors of a particular campus? One possibility. Proactive versus reactive. As I was saying a few minutes ago, are you looking for leadership not just from the president, but from the chancellors and others, senior officers in the system, for looking to the future, for being bold, for being ready to change based on this almost revolution in the environment we're in? Or is it better to take, I don't think there's such a term as passive leaderships like jumbo shrimp, but, or should it be a more relaxed kind of leadership? Should the presidents and the chancellors have a relationship that has a lot of the team in it? Okay, no one is suggesting that your president not have the ultimate authority, but is it a me boss, you not kind of situation, or is it one where, no, we respect each other, we work together, and we're going to go forward together based on dialogue and mutual vision. Some people have said maybe if we were one university, we should have one HLC, Higher Learning Commission accreditation for everybody. Is that a good idea? What would be the downsides of attempting that? Should some programs be combined, either across two institutions or across the whole system? Should there be one English department, for example, throughout all 4 campuses? Or are there some occasions where you might have 2 programs that are pretty good but not as good as they could be, but if you put them together, you might have a real powerhouse? Okay, quick definitions. Flagship, or stick with modifications of the current organizational structure with the flagship CEO being separate from the system CEO. Thoughts?
And Terry, let me make a comment about the flagship model. I've always just informally heard that MU was the flagship campus. I've heard our VP say it. I've even heard some chancellors say it. I've heard curators say that. But then I find out that we're not actually a flagship model. So I think that's important to kind of understand what having an AAU institution or a flagship campus means. We obviously say it, but we're actually not one technically. So I'm really curious to hear people's thoughts about that.
Alex, do you want to comment on that?
I think Moon did a very good job of discussing this at the last meeting.
So,
Teamwork in action, folks.
yeah, the flagship model is when I think about the University of Michigan model, that is the flagship model, or Texas A&M, where it's either Ann Arbor or College Station administrators that actually define the role and responsibility and direct the activities of the other campuses. The model that we have is not like that. Now, Mizzou is the largest. It's the AAU institution. It's the most research active. It has a medical school, hospital, and extension. And by virtue of that, many people consider it to be the flagship campus. But it is not the flagship model that we have. For example, Alex collaborates with Chris, but Alex doesn't direct Chris's activity. So we are not a flagship model, even though we have a campus that is rightfully called the flagship campus because of its AAU status and the fact that it is the largest public research university that we have.
So I'd like to weigh on this topic. I think it is a de facto flagship. Everybody recognizes it's the largest, and it has the importance which we want to preserve of AAU status. For that reason, it has greater and deeper research and greater investment for that purpose. But I'd hate to see it with a capital F. One of my partners, one of our best alums in terms of helping with alums, and some other folks, all graduates of University of Missouri at Columbia, formed the Flagship Society. Maybe some of you are members of it. And that was largely for the purpose of lobbying to make sure that the Columbia campus got its fair or greater share of funds. I thought that was a mistake. I didn't join it because I see the campuses as having their unique relationships The Columbia campus being what it is and should continue to be what it is. It is the AAU campus, and I'll call it the flagship when I'm talking with people, but I didn't join that society because I didn't want to polarize. That's my thought on calling it a flagship campus.
Well, there's other perspectives on this choice.
I've got a thought on this, maybe a question for Ryan, but, you know, we're talking about do you combine accreditation, you know, and all these various topics. We have one balance sheet, correct?
Yeah,
We have one combined balance sheet.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a very serious decision that was made maybe many years ago. And, you know, I think that's relevant because to me, that's kind of maybe the most important decision.
Excellent point.
But, go ahead. Okay, point. I want to make a point about the flagship. Those are good comments, John. But if we acknowledge that MU is the flagship campus, I don't think there's much debate about that. I think that's the common ground we have. Then what is MU's role within the system? Is it a leader? Do the other campuses try to complement? You know, do we find more ways to collaborate around MU? I mean, what does that mean for all the other campuses if we're going to call it a flagship campus? Is it just a flagship in name only, or are we going to actually incorporate processes and structures around it to kind of build upon it being a flagship campus? What does that mean to us? Is one of the other questions I think we need to address. John, do you have a thought?
I don't want to call it formally the flagship. I think if you put a capital F on it, you're going to alienate actually a majority of our general university population. There are more students on the other three campuses and will be more alums than there are in Missouri. Another issue is most of the curators have always been from the University of Missouri at Columbia. I look around this board and I'm among them. I'm the old white guy who's one of you in terms of being from University of Missouri at Columbia. There is a tendency, if you formalize the structure and you make the MU campus the campus, and the other campuses are supposed to complement or fit in around it, I think it's a mistake going forward. The growth is going to be in the urban areas, not going to be a residential campus in Columbia substantially more than the other universities. The rate of growth is greater in those other areas. And having said that, it is the AAU, and it's not among equals. It is different, and it needs to keep that status. But you have to understand how this is going to play out on the other campuses and be sensitive to that.
Alex, do you want to comment on this?
So, I mean, I think it is important that for Mizzou that we are recognized as the AAU, powerhouse research university within the state of Missouri. And that is our role, and that's why we're going to continue to drive the research and move up even further in the research rankings. I do think that with the responsibility of being such a campus, then you have responsibility to the whole system in many ways. We are many ways leaders, and that means that you actually have to help and work with others, and you learn from others. Flagship itself is a concept I've heard used in many places, and I've heard it used both ways, and I'm comfortable with the slightly different definitions, right? I mean, there is in the SUNY system, Buffalo and Stony Brook refer to themselves as flagships. So there they have two flagships.
At least.
Yes, at least. Albany and Binghamton would also argue that they're up there. So I think it's a language that has been used to represent that it is the preeminent university, research university within Missouri, and that I think is something that we all agree to.
Mm-hmm. As we were developing this presentation, I asked that this topic be the first one on there so that we can discuss it, but also make a decision about how we're going to operate as a university. And as the president of the University of Missouri system, We don't have a flagship model, and I don't prefer a flagship model. The reason being is that each of the campuses do provide their unique aspects, and our faculty and students at the other campuses deserve the support to realize our objective, which is to achieve excellence in student success, research, and engagement. And if that doesn't take away from the success that Mizzou will have, we are not going to be competing with ourselves. Alex is going to be competing with other AAUs. UMKC and UMSO are going to compete with other urban public research universities. Missouri S&T competes with Colorado State. They compete with Colorado School of Mines, universities that are known for science and technology. And I think the sooner that we decide that we are going to maintain a 4-campus system that really leverages the strengths that we have in each of the campuses is the right approach, so that our faculty and students can move on and to achieve the excellence that we need. That will be my preference, but I'd like to hear others as well.
May I add this?
Phil.
You know, it seems like there's confusion around this and two different definitions of what flagship is. Maybe we'd be better off just not use the word flagship, use some other moniker and talk about the fact that, you know, we are research, we are the university hospital, you know, we are the biggest, et cetera, we are AAU. Use some other word and forget about flagship altogether. I mean, maybe that's pretty dramatic, but.
Steve and then Barbara.
All right, so I think we're talking about two different issues. One is whether or not the Columbia campus deserves to be called a flagship with a capital F or a small f. I think that's a debate for another day. The issue is whether we want a flagship model of system governance, and I haven't heard support in this meeting or elsewhere for that.
Barbara, maybe this might be the last word on this one. Go ahead, please.
I would just add, representing the UMKC campus, I would acknowledge that Columbia is the AAU research-intensive institution, and it has a place of preeminence in our constellation for that very reason. And I would say, if I were sitting in Alex's shoes, that's one reason why I would be incredibly concerned of the idea of a combined accreditation across the system, because they won't be an AAU institution if you combine accreditation across the system.
Excellent point.
Terry, just so that, and a couple questions I've got. One reason that I wanted to do the task force is because I don't think and haven't heard a clear message in the years I've been here as to anybody who can tell me exactly what the relationship is. So I want a task force so that we can agree on that and have it in a discussion and move forward. I didn't hear Steve's history in the way that you did, John. What concerns me about that is that it has clearly not been the practice, that somehow without a change in rule, which meant without a discussion and without a debate, it changed. What bothers me is when we have changes without discussion and out debate, that is when things start falling apart. I have absolute confidence in the people in this room that we can reach agreements. Now, they may not all be unanimous, but we can reach agreements. But we can't agree on anything unless we have the discussion, which is why I think part of the discussion is how did this morph without the Board of Curators taking action?
I actually agree with, go ahead.
Let me finish. One thing. We always talk about the unique flavor. Now, I'm not telling you to do this now, but at some time in this task force process, I want someone to quit giving me the generalized pablum of unique character. We have to focus, and we have to make a decision specifically what those unique characters are. And so at some point in time, I'm not going to put them on the hot spot now, but I'd like the chancellors to be ready by the time of this to tell me what their unique character is and what their focus is. And I'd like the chancellors to tell me what they believe during their time the relationship with the university is. So I'm not saying to do that now, but as we move forward, to me, those seem the critical issues that we have to hear.
Excellent. And Cindy, I know probably among others are noting these things. John, did you want?
I'd like to say I agree with David. We need to get on with the business. And I also said, I think at the beginning, I agreed with Steve's recitation of history, but it's a history of a phrase that was not well thought out. So whether we're talking about one university or whether we're talking about flagship isn't what matters. What matters is that for over a half a century, we have not had the benefit of those 4 campuses and what they can do if they work and collaborate together. And I think what we're going to get to after we get through what I worry about is the buzzwords, I think we're going to get to the question of how do we cause to happen what may have been the original intent was to take 4 separate universities, put them together, and the whole will be much greater than this, than the parts. And we can't command it as a curator. Moon can't command it as the president. We have to have the campuses and the chancellors and the faculties understanding how great we could be if we had that collaboration, which may have originally been envisioned but hasn't happened.
Very, very well said. Thank you, John.
Indeed. We're content with the concluding, as Steve articulated, that there hadn't been a heck of a lot of support for the other. Gentleman in the back, identify yourself, please.
Alash, come to the mic, please, over there.
I am Parash and also graduate student representing the graduate student. So I have seen one point, that is combined program. So as we know that we have 4 campus and working under a system. And I strongly believe, and most of the students believe, that competition is good, but cooperation is great. Okay? So instead of combining the program, we can collaborate. We can explore for dual degree program, might be dual campus program or multi-campus program. Suppose I am from nuclear engineering background. So in our campus, we have a reactor, nuclear reactor. In Columbia campus, they also have a reactor. They have the biggest reactor in university campus in the USA. But they don't have, right now, they don't have the nuclear program. If someone want to do a nuclear engineering program, they don't have the option, but they have the facility. But we can make a dual program. A student can do research over there, come to here for the course. We have a small one that is good for a student. We have big one that is good for research. So we can collaborate. I think the Board of Curators will take this consideration to make the explore, to make dual program or multi-campus program. Also, one more thing I want to include. Suppose we are saying that we are in a rapid changing global situation, and might be after 20 years, the university system will be totally different. All people will not come to university. They will go for some professional degree from Amazon or Google or Microsoft. Okay, so what about we can explore for a professional graduate program that will be a combination of industry and the academician. There will be 2 advisors, one from the academic side and another from the industry side. Who are working in the industry, they can do the program by taking online courses, and they will do research in their industry or job. So hopefully you can explore something like this, and we would love to have this type of program. Thank you.
Excellent contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On to number 2. Okay. This may seem kind of granular for this discussion. I don't think it is, because it kind of gets at the heart of the kind of assertion of authority in a cooperative manner that may be defining your new system. So the question, should the vice chancellors at the campuses report directly to their kind of opposite number, student affairs, finance, academics, whatever, at the system level? And I'm going to turn to the president, who's been articulate on this in the past, if I might to lead it off.
In our finance operation, Ryan Rapp, as a vice president, works very well in collaboration with the CFOs at other campuses. And the reason that it works well is that they have a common vision, common goal. And they also know that when the CFOs come to the meetings, that they come with the support of their chancellors. And so that's been a very good operation. I've seen some campuses that have vice presidents, vice chancellors that report directly to vice presidents, and it leaves out the chancellor's role in defining the strategies for that campus. And that is disruptive, and it can be disruptive. And so, but I do believe that that close collaboration and mission alignment from the vice chancellors and the chancellors with system priorities is going to be key. Is going to be key.
Other perspectives on this question?
I would like to hear from one of the, I saw Rhonda. I like to pick on Rhonda. Can we,
come on up.
can we hear from Rhonda on this? And I might add, part of this is I don't think they should report, but Rhonda's got a perspective of a campus where they didn't even necessarily give each other all the information. And I'm talking, of course, of some past with Kaffner. So I want you to kind of give us, well, if we're going to have discussions, we have to have discussions,
All right.
real discussions. Everyone likes to talk euphemistically. I'm not that clever. So I want you to talk a little bit about that and how we're solving that.
I appreciate the opportunity, Curator Steelman. One of the things I've observed over my career is that to really be successful, it really comes down to team endeavors. It's very rarely that you can have ongoing success when people individually plot their course and they don't have to consider other people's issues. So when you think about the colleges and schools on our campus, they need to have their sense of ownership of what they do on behalf of our university. But they need to understand that they're connected to the broader campus. And to me, that works all the way up and down a university. So what I need in my fiscal officer operation is I need them to know day in and day out how their school or college is working. But I need them to understand that they have a fiduciary responsibility and that my role as Vice Chancellor for Finance is to give them the infrastructure to be successful in the financial endeavors, but they cannot do that as a police officer with their dean. So they do that in being creative and strategic and helping each leader think through of all the things we want to do, what fits within what we have resources for, what do we shoot for to grow those resources, how do we work collaboratively to not just say no. I'm a financial officer who's not an accountant, and a couple times in my career, I won't say which former chancellor of mine questioned whether I should be in my role because I wasn't an accountant. But one of the reasons I ended up in a finance role is one of my first bosses said to me, you know, Rhonda, what we really are challenged with is making the best use of all of our resources. It's not necessarily just about the dollars and cents on the balance sheet or in the income statement. It's about how do we make sure with the precious resources we have, we deliver as much good as we can, because that's our public mission. And so he said, as an economist, he was used to me talking to him about, well, you have unlimited things you want to do, but you got to set some priorities and you got to choose among them. So to me, that's what I challenge our fiscal people to do. Know your numbers, be prepared at those meetings, make sure you can say to your leader, okay, you know you're taking some risk here and some risk there, but as long as you have a portfolio of opportunities and risks, you can make all that work. And so I see my relationship with my chancellor as vital. So he very much needs to plot out a course over time that takes Mizzou in a direction that's very positive. And then I need to be standing next to him saying, okay, when I project out all the things you're trying to do, here are some opportunities, here's some risks, and how are we going to put together a reasonable course? And the last thing I'll say, since you gave me a mic, and most people try not to do that, is when I think about the university, one of my observations over my 24 years here is that people become tired, and it's part of the human experience. So we are a very long-standing entity, And so over time, when you're led by people who see their own end coming, there's a tendency to become more risk averse, to try and, batten down the hatches, make sure I can pay for my bills until I expire. We aren't supposed to end. So when we think about how we need to manage day in and day out, we aren't entering a point in our life as a university in which we need to turn down our investment strategy. We need to be thinking, as I describe to people, always like a 30-year-old. You wouldn't tell a 30-year-old to just put all your money in all the safe places, but you might tell someone, be pretty safe with your strategy once your opportunities to grow other revenues turn down. So what I observe as a fiscal officer is sometimes, and people actually count on me to be the one to tell them no, because they think, well, the finance person will say, we can't afford it, we can't afford it. We can't afford not to invest, but we have to think of the balance points. So you don't take a whole bunch of crazy risk without knowing what your other options are. But if I had an observation about some of what has been difficult for this institution, is that we became very, very risk averse and didn't always make the number of programmatic research and other kinds of investments that really were the things we needed to do to make sure we were thriving into the future.
Moon has a comment, but I want to ask, do you now feel that there is a free and open flow of data and information all the way from the fiscal officers through the deans to you and on to Ryan Rapp?
I think we are very close to full freedom. Will I say it's 100%? I think there's still some things we're working on, but it's probably, it is the best it's been in my career.
Is that a change in culture?
It's a change in culture. It's a change in understanding of the underlying realities. People see those slides that show how much we've moved away from state support to tuition support, and they think about it in a set of terms, but over time that also means we have to think differently as to how we operate. So at a point when the state resource was the primary resource, the amount of tolerance there was for small numbers of decision makers to decide how to align those resources, there was a lot more tolerance for that because it was a pool of resources invested in the greater good of the state and for higher education. As the payer group continues to change, they have every reason to expect from us greater and greater transparency about what we do. And I think at certain points in time, our own faculty and staff haven't had the kind of transparency into what's really driving the university. And so I think within the fiscal officers and with the leadership groups, we're in a pretty good place in terms of that transparency and understanding. The next and the difficult thing is to continue to make that information available throughout the faculty and the staff and the folks every day making the university great.
Well,
So Ron, I've got a quick question. So Rhonda, would you recommend that vice chancellors report to the vice presidents?
I would not.
Okay.
No, I think, and I would also say that I think it comes down to hiring people with the right charge to those people.
Okay.
So it's never been a question in my mind, my entire career, that I had a fiduciary responsibility up through the whole university. And it's the best relationships I've had with bosses and these other matrix parts of the organization have been when everybody's at the table with the purpose of taking the university forward in a very productive way. When you get folks who become very segmented, and unfortunately I'll have to tell you there are times in my career where I've had a boss that says, don't tell the next layer up. Those are very difficult ways for the university to move forward. So.
All right, thanks.
Michael, is it?
Oh, Jonathan?
Jonathan Curtright. I serve as the CEO of MU Healthcare. In these complex matrix organizations that we are all living in, we have to be comfortable with multiple people that we need to keep happy and need to be a part of what we're up to. Right off the bat, I firmly believe that having the vice chancellors need to continue to report to the chancellors. With a couple of caveats, however. I would say that And this is the way I work with Marcia Fisher, and this is the way I work with Ryan Rapp and others, is that the selection of executives, the goal setting for those executives, the integration that has to happen to create a system, and also performance evaluation. Those are all very specific things that we can do to make it so that the system executive has feedback into how that person is performing. So I do think that there are specific ways that we could create a little bit more of a system approach on this in a very thoughtful way, and I would ask that the committee would think about some of those ways.
Could I just make a quick comment? Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on something that Rhonda said, which is really important, because I had this slide that I was going to use a little later. Rhonda talked about what was happening in the system and when it was predominantly state-funded for tuition. And that's an important point that she made, because the letter was written, the letter was referenced, was written in 1967 when there was significant investment going into the system, a time when we were really in startup mode. And if you think about a startup company, leadership of a startup company is different than when the company is really operating. And there is much more acceptance for more directed individual direction in terms of where we're headed. As the company matures, things change. And what's happening here now is that not only has the company matured, but we've gone to a time where more of the resources are coming from the students on the campuses. And that means that, again, we need to be thinking about how we operate collectively. And I agree with, there were some great comments made. Rhonda, that's probably why Rhonda and I work so well together. She made a lot of comments without me even talking to her about some of these things. But that there is a need for us to recognize our responsibility of being in a system. And we need to recognize what that means in terms of how we work. So when we make decisions at Mizzou, if they are major decisions, we make those decisions in collaboration. We talk to Ryan, we talk to Moon, we talk to everybody about what we're trying to accomplish, because we want to make sure that it's clear that those aren't going to have impact on other campuses. And I think if we can have that type of relationship, a lot of this goes away. It is what Weaver said, is if you have people with the right, I forgot how I worded it, but with the goodwill. That's what it takes. And if you have that, a lot of this structure may not be needed.
I think what's incredibly important is developing a notion of a shared vision. And so I think when I think about this notion of the reporting structure, for me, what's been incredibly important for me in my role in working with the different campuses has been making sure that they were not viewing my involvement as trying to lead with a level of power and control, but trying to develop organically a shared vision that would allow us to understand that we were rowing in this particular direction, but you had latitude with regard to which material you would use to kind of row with, right? And I think that has been really beneficial, particularly with this additional joint role at MU, right? This notion of both the shared vision, the importance of relationships, and the importance of equity and valuing the input of all of those involved in this work. And I think if we can lead with that and be consistent with that and universal in its application, it gives us a much better foundation to move forward with, and maybe a less of a need with this kind of hierarchical kind of structure.
Thank you, Kevin.
Can I,
Ryan?
I just want to add to what Rhonda was discussing. I think, as I think about it, it really is, I have way less concerns about what the reporting lines are. I think part of what works now in the relationship I have with the CFOs across the system is that there's accountability. And I think the one thing I do think we're moving in the right direction, but I think we need to be probably very intentional and probably formally define what that accountability is, both between the finance function, but just also operationally. And so what I mean by that is agreeing we may want to say, we think about how are we going to solve this $160 million problem. Well, it's a lot of different things that are going to solve that. What we have to solve that, though, is I have to know that the chancellors working with their CFOs are accountable to achieve a certain level of financial performance. I don't know everything that they need to be doing to solve that. And in fact, me trying to think through how they might solve that is probably going to lead to really poor outcomes. But I need them to know that they're accountable to achieving a certain level of financial performance.
And if I could just add to that, because this is critical, and I really appreciate the work that Steve did to give that update, I think there's actually a fundamental fallacy in something that was read. You said, Steve, that Weaver's letter said, common intent relationships and culture are more important than structure and roles. And that isn't incorrect, but it sets up a dichotomy like an either or. And it's really a both and I think Curator Phillips pointed out that really what we're trying to create here is a sense of what are our articles of confederation, so to speak. And it's the accountabilities that you are supposed to hold us to, and then how do we best respond to that? And we don't know that, I don't think, because we didn't set it up, I'm not sure in the first place, to have that clarity of your relationship and the structure and roles. And I think that may be what happens in the next couple of months, is if we're going to have a council of chancellors working with the president to come together and say whose role is what, we might be able to finally get those articles of confederation, because we spend inordinate amounts of time in conversation about who's doing what or where does it need to occur. That could go an unbelievably long way.
Terry, one question I think that you've raised earlier, and you start out with the very top of your slide, is what does one university mean? And as I listened to Barb and to Alex and to everyone who's spoken, including David and John, it seems to me, though, that it's just illogical to think that the one university of the mid-1960s is the one university of the time we're living in now. The university doesn't even begin to resemble what it was in the mid-1960s. So I think the issue is that obviously the finite details of the one university of the mid-60s can't be the university of today. I think the question is more, are that handful of core principles of the one university as tweaked by the passage of time and the necessities of what has occurred. We don't have a member in the university system who 2 years ago was a junior college, or who 5 years ago was a private small university in an urban area. So the issue seems to be, what is the one university now as tweaked by all of these events of over a half century?
That's right.
Exactly. Well, very well put. I'm ready to move on to number 3. I think was this very specific question opened up larger issues that was helpful. Do any of you see any material changes in the authority or responsibility of the curators as a result of what you've been talking about here?
I think Steve might have a comment on the Constitution.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have a whole lot of choice there, even if they wanted to, and I don't think they want to, but the Constitution, Missouri Constitution, requires that the Board of Curators govern the state university. So at least from that standpoint, there is a legal requirement. There is also some statutory requirements.
An attorney giving terse advice. God, I congratulate you, Steve. Thank you. This proactive reactive thing, I mean, it almost seems like a no-brainer. But nevertheless, the task force felt it would be good to be out there. Are you looking for forward-looking, energetic, challenging leadership, since he appears not to be in the room, of the sort that you have now with President Moon?
If anyone doesn't, please raise your hand.
Okay.
That's answered.
Can I add something to that, though? I mean, you
Please,
said
Alex.
The president, but I think that proactive leadership goes through all the campuses.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And usually when I use the word leadership here, it is in that collective sense. And actually, the next one brings that up. Your relationship with the president and that of your fellow chancellors with the president.
Can you skip over that until Moon gets back? Because that might be a conversation that he would be interested in.
Can I just add, though, to Alex's comment, because it does tie into the curator authority as we define it. Proactive also means planful. And again, I would say, as provost and as interim chancellor for UMKC, I welcome that holding us to an accountability. I welcome that setting of metrics and saying these are the goals and making sure that we live by those. And it's a lot better than being very reactive, which we have if we're not proactive.
Thank you. Alex?
Sir, and I just want to do one more thing, and I think, because Barb triggered it in my mind, I mean, I think it is important for us to, it's not just, I mean, it is, of course, legal, as Steve mentioned, but I think everybody needs to recognize that the board is the ultimate authority, right? We all go up to the board, and therefore we have, there's a requirement on us to make sure that this board, the president, is informed of things on our campuses, for example, that might affect the entire system, right? And that needs to be something that us as chancellors are held accountable for too, is we should know when to escalate items. We should know when to manage them at our campus level.
How is that accomplished? Not exercising them, but determining what goes where. Do you have any suggestions on that score?
I wish I do. I mean, I think what's important is you have to recognize which problems might gather enough attention that they start to have an impact on the other campuses and on the board, and has it really does reflect back on us with the legislature and with the public. And we need to recognize that there are some topics that happen, even if it doesn't maybe reflect on the other campuses, it will reflect ultimately on the university. And that's something that we need to be aware of. So it's always thinking about, yes, this could have, if it's going to have any type of global impact, when I say global across Missouri, then that's something that's going to impact the entire university, and this board and the president should certainly be aware and part of what ultimately we will be deciding and doing in some of those areas.
It's a well-known book called Leadership is Conversation. That's part of the, no surprises. Yeah.
No surprises, that's right.
In a sense, I think you've already dealt with this question, the president-chancellor relationship being a team one with, but nevertheless, the president's responsibility to hold people accountable, Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, who knows? Only if you're from New England. Any more discussion on that, or have we done enough?
Well, go ahead.
John?
No, I was pointing to you.
Oh, well, all right. So there's some good examples to refer to, and I do think it takes some further discussion to sort this out. There are instances when I think we all agreed we wanted, you were out of the room, but we want proactive system leadership and also proactive chancellor campus leadership, and there wasn't any disagreement. And when we talk about the president-chancellor relationship, we've had some recent examples of this when we have interim chancellors. And I'm more familiar with the UMKC campus. I live there. But interim chancellor Bickelmeyer inherited 5 or 6 unbelievably complex and weighty problems. Particularly when we selected a different chancellor, I mean, she is in some respects a lame duck as chancellor, and we're hoping that she'll stay many years as our provost. But it was appropriate, I think, for Moon to swoop in and take some of the heat off of a couple of those issues where he could actually interface with the community. And I've got a couple of examples that in mind where it would have been inappropriate for her to be burdened with that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. Similarly, at S&T, I've learned since being here that there are some cultural issues that have surfaced and that Moon has worked. And my feeling, or my 30,000-foot perception is that in both of those instances, Moon has worked with the interim chancellors. But in normal times, and when you have a chancellor, it seems to me that the board's place and the president's place is to work on vision. I think we probably have some visioning yet to do. And secondly, strategic plans and coordination of strategic plans between the campuses, which to my knowledge has never been done, at least not in my tenure, and to leave the implementation to the chancellors and hold them accountable so that we don't have issues that bubble up to the president or the president's designee and him having to take care of implementation or issues that are campus issues. So I think some discussion of the delineation of what chancellors do and the authority they have, and the strategic and visionary and holding accountable that the president and the curators do is appropriate. I'm just stating my own view, but there are times, and one of those times is when a chancellor is the problem. And in those cases, you use the 1-800, maybe someday you'll use an ombudsman, but you don't follow the normal chain so that it can get to the president. But I think the president has done a great job, and that his highest and best use is vision, strategy, and oversight. That's just me, but I do think there needs to be more delineation than there has been.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can go back just a couple years, and when we don't have proactive system leadership, we know what can happen. So President Choi's done a great job. I've been in Columbia since about 1979. So when we think of the president-chancellor relationship, and we had a lot of these discussions when we did a presidential search, on the Columbia campus, because the system is literally located 5 blocks away from campus, I would say there's a majority of people, even alumni, that have no idea what the president does versus who the chancellor is at the university. They may know titles, but they don't know responsibilities. I do think we're in a different position of what President Choi has done and what Chancellor Cartwright has done and will do. But I will send out a warning. Again, since I've been there since 1979, there has always been some issue between that campus chancellor and the president. And it's always been a question in the past that many of us locally thought, should the system be located a bit further away from that campus, which gives the chancellor a greater right and a greater to run his or her campus. I think I could probably go through every chancellor that I've seen in Columbia and every president, and there was always a conflict. And so many of us think that at some point maybe the system should be a little bit separated. The other part of that is that the other chancellors, and again, I think we've turned such a corner that the chancellors from the other schools feel that this system president is a big part of what they're doing. In the past, we didn't have that sometimes. We had presidents that hung out in Columbia a lot, and that's all they did. And that's what we saw, and that's why some people thought they ran that campus. So that's the only thing I would add is that as curators, we have to always maintain the fact that what the system president does and what the chancellor, at least at the Columbia School, at the campus does.
Thank you, John. I would say that in every state that has this kind of structure, you have that potential or real conflict, and it just depends on how mature and adroit the two players are to bring it off. But I'd like to pose a question to your colleague on your right there. Darrell championed the idea of councils, and I'm wondering, these would be a council of chancellors, council of provost. Is that, between now and June and July, is that a venue where some of the issues you were talking about, the relationship, the team, what it means in a crisis, could be talked through and identified, and boundaries set?
Are you looking at Moon?
No, I was looking at you, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I thought that was a great idea. I don't know whose idea it was. I do think that it ought to be a council of provosts and separate of chancellors that doesn't have a babysitter from the system. I think they need to have some independence of thought. So I think that it's been stated 2 different ways in our materials about whether there's going to be someone from the system sitting in babysitting them, or whether they're going to have a little bit of independence and then but I've seen it stated two different ways. One way it was a question, another way it was presumed.
And let me address that, John, and you make a great point. And I talked to a few people about it, and what we're going to do with our councils is we're going to have Steve collect the information from our chancellors and from our provosts, present it. He's going to have individual interviews to talk about these issues. He's going to put it in a more of a comprehensive format, and then it's going to be presented to Moon and then to Steve Graham, who's going to chair the Council of Provosts. So that we want candid conversations. We want them to be somewhat confidential on an individual level, and it's going to be presented in a comprehensive format so that to kind of alleviate some of those fears that you said. Because I do think that, I think this avenue gives us the best information to go off of. What do you think about that?
If I'm understanding, they're going to have council meetings where the four of them can get together, and in addition to that, Steve's going to do separate one-on-one interviews.
We'll start off with the one-on-one interviews, then get together to kind of talk about this, the information and data that he's collected comprehensively.
John, my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing two things. We're doing a task force issue, which is to get the information, but I think that we are considering, and may well come up for a vote if the task force and the board wants it, the creation of a council.
Yeah, well, I was only speaking to the council. And I assumed that was going, provost and of chancellors, so that on a regular basis, they will get together and be able to freely exchange the question.
Yes, after we get over this big hump, we're going to do the individual interviews. But then after that, yes, we're going to have discussions, and they're going to get together and talk about all these very issues as we move forward.
Well, my normal preference would be to have an outsider. In terms of 360s, you have somebody else. I think we trust Steve enough. If Steve's the one to do it, he does report to us. So there's a degree of independence, and he's cheaper than going out and hiring a consultant. Unless, of course, it's Terry.
Yeah. And
got me worried there for a
and
minute.
when we talk about proactive leadership, we all agree on that, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And I've heard this idea of 360s or having the campuses give an evaluation of the system, having this system evaluate the campuses. I'm not sure when the last time we did that. Can someone give me the last date that we've done something like that where the campuses could evaluate the system? Because I think that's proactive leadership. You're getting data, your decisions are data-driven. This is what we've been talking about for the last year that I've been on the board. And it doesn't seem like we're collecting that kind of information. Maybe we're getting it informally, but what do the chancellors and the campuses think about that idea? Or Moon, what do you think?
Can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah,
Chairman?
Yes, when we talk about proactive leadership, I
Right.
want to know I was wondering what that meant. And to me, getting data from the campuses, where the campuses evaluate the system and what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And then vice versa. That seems to me to be a way that we can be proactive in our leadership. But I'm not sure when the last time we've done that is. Maybe someone could tell me if we've done it, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that proactive leadership is very critical. But I want to go back to the theme of this topic here. I'm an academic. You hired me to come in, lead the student success, research growth, partnerships, and engagement. My role is not to oversee the back office operation. My role is to work closely with the chancellors and the provosts to ensure that we achieve it. Not because that's the charge you've given me, that's been my belief in all of my career in academics. So that through proactive leadership, it goes both ways. Sometimes great ideas and concepts come from the chancellors and the campuses. But there will be times when I see some great opportunities, especially in collaborations, that we need to seek. So if the board and the president is only a mechanism for ideas to come from the campuses for them to be approved, then we are not accomplishing our goals of achieving the mission of the university. So proactive leadership really does go both ways, from the campuses. That's why we have outstanding chancellors and their leaders. But it has to come from here. So the more that we get to understand about how we can contribute to those three critical areas, that's where I see proactive leadership really taking shape and improving the university.
And as a curator, I agree, Dr. Choi, with everything you've just said, the way you've described it.
I'm going to suggest, Darrell, if I might, that we have the task force take up that question of evaluation and the circularity of it.
Okay.
We got a pretty full agenda here and
There
worth
had
talking about.
Just really quickly, there was a period of time, several years running, where the system officers were evaluated by the campus folks. It was not bidirectional, but I don't think we've done it in about 2 or 3 years now, but it was done for 3 or 4 years running.
It's an intriguing idea, but it's not one to go with or not go with, just on the, in the back there. Yes, ma'am.
Can you, Professor Mitchell?
First of all, I very much appreciate, is this?
It's on.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate this conversation and being able to witness it and listen to it. But one of the critical components, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Mitchell. I'm the chair of the UMKC Faculty Senate and a member of the Interfaculty Council. And this is a fascinating conversation, but I think that there's a critical component missing, and that is, what do you envision the role of the IFC, for example, which is the only collaborative faculty governance organization in the University of Missouri system, which has not been part of these conversations in a direct way. And yet, some of the stated objectives for having this conversation and for this task force is faculty development, enhanced research opportunities, teaching and excellence in teaching, enhancing our students' opportunities. And yet, without consultation and collaboration with the main faculty governance organization, we feel that we are not being given a seat at this table.
I think I'd like to respond. It hasn't appeared yet in these discussions, but in preparation for this, it was discussed. But we're not through this session yet, but it has been on our list of things to talk about. And I think that the curators, and I think Moon is quite sensitive. I did make a reference earlier that as we're going through these changes, we have to go through including the faculty. So your point's well taken, but it ain't over yet. We'll get to that discussion.
What I wanted to say was that I think that having a provost council and a chancellor's council are fantastic ideas, because I think that that's some of the missing pieces. That I know that there are plenty of informal conversations that go on among the chancellors and among the provosts and between them. That the third part of that pie is the IFC.
Let me ask this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Darryl.
that's okay. Just one comment, and that was really the reason why we were opening this discussion up today to everyone. So if you've got some specific questions or any recommendations, that's why we're here, and we really want to hear them. So.
Thank you.
All right.
I also might say that we've been very careful in that what we've done so far has not really got off into the academic programming and to the academics. If it would, I think we all understand shared governance. I do believe there is a desire by at least most of the Board of Curators to understand that there are shared governance has separate paths, and that we very much respect the academy and their path, but certain decisions we need to have consideration and collaboration, but are made by administration and the board.
And
Steve and then Alex.
And history would certainly support your comments, because the IFC was formed in part because the university went to a system model. They realized that the president of the system and other system officers would be making decisions that affected faculty, and they were kind of removed from that, certainly much more removed than the chancellor or provost of campus. And so the voice of the faculty to the system comes through the IFC.
Well, and as ironically, as a professional historian, I can say that sometimes arguments from history can be problematic because, as I tell my students, psychoanalyzing dead people is never a good idea. Thank you.
I found that psychoanalyzing live people is never a good idea.
I just wanted to make a couple comments. One is we were talking about vision, strategy, and oversight coming from the president, and Moon made an important comment about the ideas coming from the campuses being approved. And one of the things that I would always also encourage is that I think it's important that ideas that originate at system are also discussed with the campuses so that they can be shaped also. Because I think that's an important part of how we continuously improve and move the whole system forward.
Very good point, very good point. And that's where the Council of Chancellors and
Exactly.
Provosts will be very important.
Exactly.
Going, okay. Combined accreditation, does anybody think this is a good idea?
No.
No.
Okay, victory. Selected program combinations, let me do a tiny bit of background on that. One idea that was proposed in the task force discussion is that virtually all or most of the programs, if there was more than one in the system, would be combined. And via discussion, the task force came, no, where it makes sense, let's talk, make it a possibility and consider a combination. But not as a kind of universal one university in the simplest sense mandate. Are people comfortable with that modification? Yeah. The faculty member earlier spoke eloquently to the potential of that, I thought. Okay.
But it wouldn't be top-down mandated, that it would be a shared governance decision about combining programs. In fact, I would think in some cases faculty may be bringing it to the attention of the system and Moon and the board that they would like to have combined programs. Though it isn't that we're talking about doing this to the faculty. That's my perspective.
The whole tenor of this thing is leadership with others, as I understand it, not top-down. Any other comment? Yes, ma'am.
When we were talking about the present structure, the one thing that occurred to me that seems to be a glaring omission is the land grant mission for the university, and where does that fit in? Is it, and I'm going to look at Steve here for an answer to this, I don't know if it's defined in statute what it means to be a land grant institution, if it's for the system, if it's for Mizzou, if it's for all of the campuses, and what's the role there? So.
Counselor?
Well, I don't know that there's a definition that there may be actually in the federal legislation, but in terms of what we actually do and how that affects us, I mean, we've got no real guidance on it. One of the things we talk about a lot is that the university's land grant mission, and that can mean a lot of different things to different people.
If I can,
Maybe it can be clarified.
yeah, no, if I can answer that.
That's a very good point, though, to make that part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I mean, if you use the strict definition of a land grant from the Morrow Act, Mizzou is the land grant. But by virtue of being part of the University of Missouri at Columbia as part of School of Mines, so is Rolla. The other two universities, it's not very clear. But if we take our current understanding of a land grant to use the research and education to help improve the lives of others and provide access, we are all land grant universities. And so I think that's an important distinction that we need to make, even though we may not be deemed as a land grant based on the Morrow Act. We are all land grant universities in our mission, as part of our mission.
Could I ask the board to weigh, because I think this is an important point, just to see if we have some consensus. I will say that I feel like the entire university has the land grant mission, regardless of where the land grant falls. But is there anybody who disagrees with that on the board, that the two that are not originally land grants have a different mission other than what we think is the land grant mission, which is You can state it a number of ways, but an obligation to the state of Missouri to discover and disseminate research and information. Yeah, that may be true. Might be a difference between, as Steve pointed out, a land-grant mission. And but does anybody doubt that the whole university has a land-grant mission? No. All 4 campuses?
I'm not sure what that means. Those are qualities that are worth adopting university-wide, but does that mean that the land-grant parts, there are certain things that are supported by legislation, federal legislation, and by funding, and are they going to now be dispersed to all the campuses, or are they going to be continue to be run through the MU campus? It has implications, but certainly the purpose. Who can say, no, we don't want to have both education and research and benefiting the state?
Marshall, do you want to answer that, or do you have an answer for that?
I thought I might escape this, but obviously not. I think it depends on, it does depend on how you want to view it. If you look historically, my understanding is that when the decision to pass the Morrill Act was done, there were 26 counties in southern Missouri where the land was, and that was federal land that was sold, and that land, the proceeds from that went to 2 institutions, and that was a state decision. The University of Missouri at Columbia was primarily the agricultural side of that, and the mechanical side of that, to a large degree, to some degree, was this campus we're on today. So you had funding off the original land grant that went to two institutions. If you fast forward that, what does land grant mean? Well, a land grant intent, and this is Marshall Stewart's version, so please, to those who may want to use this, it is my version, was to bring the common person, man or woman, into higher education. Because up till that moment, it had been for the affluent. So I think what was just said, Mr. Chairman, by you, is that an ideal we all want? Absolutely. So from the idealism, no question. There were some things that became very unique in that, though. One of those was the advent of agricultural research stations, which later came under the Hatch Act in the late 1800s. And what that did was begin to extend the university out. Then you move forward to 1914 when the Smith-Lever Act was passed, and that's when extension occurred. So a lot of people look at it today and they think land grant, they think about agriculture, obviously being a part of it. They also think about the aspect of extending the knowledge out. So if you look at it from a purist standpoint, I think most people would say, no question, Mizzou is a land grant. I think people are intrigued to know that probably Missouri S&T has that heritage. Then I think the question becomes, how do you want to define it going forward? And I don't know that there is, again, Steve, we're going into a legal world here that I don't claim to know, but I think that is a decision you have to make. I think the idealism of extending knowledge, absolutely, President Choi, what you're talking about is to serve the people. That's something that you will find in private institutions today. You will find that in non-land grants today. You will find that in all institutions are trying to do that. So I think you have an opportunity to think through that, and I think that's something you do need to think about, though, what that means, and then clearly define it, because I do think it causes confusion, and people need to have a sense of what that means.
Darrell, then Steve.
Yeah, I like the idea that the other campuses live the land-grant mission, but I think if you water down what land-grant means to people by saying that Elmsville and UMKC, or somehow you tag the name land-grant onto that, I think, especially in the ag community, I think they would laugh at you. You know, we know what the land-grant schools are. It's Mizzou. And so I wouldn't throw that name around loosely to people that really know and care about what it means. So.
And if I can add one point to that, because I think this is important, what Darrell's talking about. If you look back and think about who were the most needed at the time of the Morrill Act and then later in that other legislation, they tended to be people in rural areas. Mm-hmm. So therefore, that's why there was a real emphasis to open it up to rural populations, which are agriculture. That's where ag was. Over the years, and many would question this today, if you were writing the Morrill Act or this other subsequent legislation today, what would you do today? How would that look today? And I think that's part of the framing that you're kind of getting to, is there are pieces of it that absolutely the agricultural community love and they hold that dearly. Many of those would contend also that it can have a broader mission. So I think you have to wrestle with that as a board, but I think it's an important conversation to have because it is strategic. You're talking about a strategic mission here. And again, it doesn't mean others can't live through that and be land-grant-like. That may be what you decide to do, or you may truly want to do that. But I do think you need to have that conversation because I think that's important as you think about what it means to be a Research One institution, AAU, and all those terms. They mean a lot to us. That public needs to understand what that means. And we have to, I think, create the narrative so they can understand better what that means.
I think, I was going to say, I think what you've said is very well taken. It is our 6th campus. If our 5th campus is the MU Health extension and land grant aspects of that. And it is already urban. I mean, one of the good facilities in Kansas City in the River Market with prime territory at low cost serves an urban extension service purpose. So it's already working quite well, not just agriculture, although it is across from the city market. I just make that point.
Yeah, I just want to.
There was a comment here and then Steve. Okay.
Steve, jump in, please.
Marshall, that was a great recitation because I think when we talk about the land grant university or the land grant mission, there is that continuum from the Morrill Act to the Hatch Act to the Smith-Lever Act. And part of all that is the idea that as a state university, part of your responsibility is to disseminate knowledge. And we do that through the extension service to every county in the state. And now I think I'm better understanding your question, Christine, because if that is in fact a worthy mission, one question becomes among a lot of state university systems, where do you locate extension? Is it at the school that has the ag school by history, or is it at the system level so that it can extend throughout the state and supply much more than kind of the traditional agricultural, dissemination more than just agricultural knowledge. In fact, at this university, extension was at the system level till 2005, 2006, something like that. So if you want to add to your list of inflammatory questions, one of them might be, where should extension be located?
No shortage of work for your task force, Daryl.
Yeah, that's right.
Before we move on, I just
Yes,
want
sir, Steve.
the timing's a little off. I didn't get in before Christine did, but I'll try to tie 3 things together that might help. One is to follow up on Linda's comment about the faculty engagement, but also the provost. We actually have a group of provosts that meet monthly and to work out a number of issues and collaborate. And we've also been talking about our role in terms of collaborative programs and looking at programs so we eliminate any kind of duplication or cooperation. And that group, I think, works extremely well with IFC, and that's why I think we've seen the results we have over the last 4 or 5 years. Those 2 groups, working hand in glove. And so some of that structure is already in place. Now, I was kind of laying back to see if it might be modified, that's fine. But I do think that we've got provost working with faculty and getting some of the results that we have.
Very helpful, thank you. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, can we also acknowledge maybe the importance of the engagement of our staff governance groups and student governance groups as well?
Okay, anything else on this? God knows there's probably some other issues that we could mine, but it might be time to move along. And actually, we've accomplished a lot of what's on the next slide and on this next sheet that I have here. This had to do with the recommendations from the task force on, broadly speaking, system culture, how decisions are made. So you just reflect on the last 45 minutes and you'll see we'll add a lot of it. The proactive idea, an energetic, forward-looking, et cetera. Unified commitment to the agenda that the president has articulated and brought to Missouri. Recognizing, nevertheless, campus strengths and something the chair will have an opportunity to hear more about, uniqueness. A bit on what it means for shared decisions. It doesn't mean there's not a decider, but it does mean there's conversation upstream of decisions. Here's one I think we're going to go till about 12:15 that we do have a little time to touch on. I'd like to do that before.
Terry, we'll have an absolutely hard stop at 12:15.
Okay, so we'll make the best of that. Unified policies across the system. unified policies across the system. It's been a subject of debate among task force members. I think a little conversation about the limits of unified policies, or how do you determine justified exceptions to unified policies, would be helpful at this stage.
I think it's on a case-by-case basis. We have to see what it actually is in reference to, and to ask the question, are the changes going to affect our ability to achieve those objectives? And I think that's a primary question that we should be asking. So not unified for the sake of being unified, but unified that actually leads to those successes.
I hear you saying not one size fits all, except where it makes sense. John?
I understand there's a difference between rules in how we call CRRs and policies. In CRRs, big thick book that most people have never read in its entirety, policies emanate from the campuses. If I'm right about that, it seems to me that there ought to be, we ought to continue that and have the policies be things that don't need to be uniform, but there's a lot that can, should, and always has been uniform. But I think it wouldn't hurt to look at the policies and say, why is this one different than that one? The free speech is the last one that has come through. I don't know if that went into the CRRs or it became uniform system policies. Do you know?
I think both a system and on-campus policy.
Okay, so it's in both. It's not a CRR? All right, but it is uniform, and why not? So I think it's a good topic for our task force.
One other topic here I just want to mention, I don't know that we have time to discuss it in depth, although it's important. Part of the bringing freshness to the system culture is the idea of nurturing creativity, innovation, collaboration, change, and that's going to take a systematic plan. It's not unless you kind of just describe it at the verbal level and then walk away from it. But I don't know that unless you want to, we have need to discuss it at length at the moment. Guess not.
For Linda Mitchell's purpose, I just wanted to call attention to the phrase on there about shared decisions. It didn't say shared governance, but we all understood that's what it meant. So thanks for calling it out.
And just by way of summary on this culture change, we've used the word balanced leadership, not minimizing the need for leadership, but also underscoring the need for consultation, conversation, advice. Okay, the task force also identified 5 possible more or less discrete initiatives as opposed to these cultural changes, which are to some degree impressionistic. Let me run through those, and here, maybe given the time, would there be any additions to the list or any subtractions from the list, and let the task force delve into each of them if that's your wish. A strong academic affairs office at the system level and a strong agenda therein. I would have to say that my looking at the system power structure is that this one does not assert leadership on the academic level, such as transfer policies, such as stimulating conversation around potentially combined programs, as many others do. So considering that as a change would be one. This is a huge one, and you're already partway downstream on this, as Ryan knows, shared integrated services. And I believe one of your slides shows a fairly massive list of the potential there. Your administrative review gives you a little bit of a leg up on that. Third, online and distance education. I believe I overheard part of your conversation yesterday, and frankly, the system is behind the curve to an extent. There's actually more going on than people realized, I think, but to an extent on the online distance ed, applying technology side. The good news there is you can learn from others, partner with people that are further along, so that's not a terribly bad news story. The fourth is strategic communications, and Professor Mitchell underscored one dimension of that, the internal communications with the faculty governance council, students and staff. The other is externally, and I always illustrate the importance of that by reference to the University of Connecticut, which Dr. Choi, of course, knows, frankly, much better than I do. But it went from an institution that did not have a particularly strong brand or reputation and flipped that with the help of a couple $2 billion from the state legislature in better times, to be sure. And I just have this sense that part of the reactive dimension to the culture in the past has meant that you haven't gotten your message out as much as you might have. So a concerted effort to do that should pay dividends. And then finally, something that is worth thinking about, a development program around the art and science of leading change in change-averse institutions, which is what the Academy is. This wouldn't take a lot of money, it wouldn't take a whole lot of time, but there are people out there who can kind of build on the common sense that your experienced leaders have already, and how to bring about these changes in the face of some opposition, or to minimize the opposition through prior conversations. So that's more of a process question. What do you think? What do you think? Do you want the task force to continue to delve into these, have the councils work on them? And are these you can't do everything at once. Is this a reasonable list of to-dos? Yes, John.
You asked if there was any we might want to add, and the one I might suggest is consider collaboration in recruiting and advancement. And this is Jamie's territory, so I'll give two examples. I've been talking with the deans here at S&T about, in engineering, about collaborating with UMKC, who does a lot of recruiting of both faculty and students in Asia. And there are things that you do here that they don't do at UMKC. He ought to be taking with him materials and say, if you want to do mining or oil and gas or specialty glass, here's the other institution in our system you can come to. That's on recruiting. And on collaboration, I sometimes joke with Chancellor George about us in Kansas City going to Express Scripts. We joke about that.
In answer to your question,
I've always considered it a joke because they've been so good to you, and what a collaboration. But we've had situations where people have gone to some of our funders in Kansas City from a different campus the same day, talking to the same person about a proposal. And maybe you ought to talk about it before that happens. It may still be that I think it ought to be on each campus, but I think you ought to consider opportunities to collaborate as opposed to always recruiting, sometimes competitively, and always fundraising sometimes competitively.
I strongly support that initiative because there are so many important initiatives for us that can get derailed when we approach especially corporate donors at different levels. And so I do appreciate that approach.
Terry, in answer to your question, I, for one, believe the task force has done an incredible job, and I would like to suggest that they continue to look at all or most of these issues, and I think we could benefit from that effort.
Thank you, Marcy.
I want a sense of the board. Does anybody else want to add anything? Anybody have any comments as to these initiatives? Is this agreeable? Okay.
Okay. Excellent. Last topic, next steps. I'm going to turn this to the chair in just a second here, but is the sense of the board you want the task force to continue to march on the issues just identified and the councils to do, the work that they select and has been assigned to them? Then on June 22nd, you get a more in-depth progress report. And I know your agendas are jam-packed, but a little more time would be great as well if you can budget it. But on the at the July meeting, on the 26th and 27th, there'll be some discussion, but then confirmation about a more precise definition of what you've talked about here going forward. The board would then act.
Any comments? That looks good to me, with the exception that I think I'm going to change and add more time on this discussion on the 22nd. I would also like to hear from general officers, people, has this been valuable and worthwhile? Okay. And I think we'll anybody object to continuing down this road? The curator representatives on the task force, of course, are Daryl and is chairing it, Julia and John, but we can always have other people participate. So I want to make sure we're marching forward. Okay.
And this was a brainstorming session, so what we're going to try to do with our chancellors and provosts is boil this down into some real concrete things that we can put in place, and we'll discuss those on June 22nd. All right?
I think we're good to go, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So what I'd like to do is move forward with Nick's presentation. I didn't want to just have discussion today. That was very valuable, but I wanted Nick to present some actual solutions to an issue that we felt was low-hanging fruit, shared services. How can we improve efficiency there, move forward with developing a better process on how we handle shared services? So Nick, I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And so again, I'm Nick Beidler with the university's General Counsel's Office. And I've had the pleasure of working with the task force for a few months to gather some information about other university systems and the relationship between the system and the campuses. And before I get into the information, I understand time is short, so I'll be brief overall, but I do want to say that I've had the pleasure of being assisted by two wonderful interns from UMKC School of Law, Ashley Chrysophilie and Cameron Rourke, who've done a great deal of work and great work. Cameron also has the distinction of being a former past president of UMSL Student Government Association, so really enjoyed their assistance. We started off by looking at a group of 8 university systems that the UM Systems Finance Office has used in the past for benchmarking our own system. With Dr. McTaggart's suggestion, added a couple of institutions to that list, Maine and Maryland. So this group of 10 systems, to be clear, they weren't identified up front as a group of aspirational schools or schools that the UM system ought to emulate. Thank you very much. But they are like us in some respects. These are public university systems with statewide mission, and with the exception of Maine and Maryland, they're also somewhat geographically proximate to us. And what we were looking for in examining the relationship between system and campus at these institutions was some common themes, particularly with respect to shared services. How have these systems that are like us in some respects approached implementing administrative shared services? One of the things that we've already touched on a little bit here today is governance models, and among the 10 schools, there were representatives of the two what I think are predominant system governance models, what you might call the true system model, where there are separate campus and system executives, and the system serves the role of providing shared services, as well as a couple of examples of the flagship model. Dr. Taggart previously mentioned Michigan and Minnesota. What was interesting is that among both models, we observed similar trends or patterns in the way that these institutions have implemented administrative shared services. Looking across these 10 schools, we noticed some pretty clear patterns in administrative shared services that are provided primarily at the system or in the flagship model by the flagship institution. Other administrative services that primarily are provided at the campus level, and then another group of administrative services that at most of these schools they're provided to some degree at both the system and campus administrative levels.
And Nick, let me jump in here. We don't know exactly with our system and our campuses how these tasks are divided up right now. Is that correct?
Well, I think that some of the information that Ryan has gathered up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we get.
Well, your activity report should be right on this issue.
I mean, what we're doing through administrative review is going to address much of this. I actually look at this, and I know this is in summary what Nick's seen, but it's largely how we're organized today.
Okay. Great. I was mistaken. Go ahead, Nick. Yep.
No, I'm glad to hear that my impression that we are somewhat consistent with these patterns is correct. there is no one institution that would be completely represented by these categories, but I think it is some useful information, again, about how systems that are like us in some respects have made decisions to allocate these administrative services. Probably the most interesting question is posed by the group of administrative services in the middle column. And that question is, how exactly has the authority or responsibility been distributed among the system and campus levels? And in talking to experts, the National Center for Higher Education Management System and National Association of System Heads, the encouragement was to really get a good answer to that question. We need to go on visits to speak with folks at the system and campus level at these institutions and see what decisions they've made and hopefully ask them what's worked and what hasn't. After having identified these patterns, we wanted to dig a little bit deeper and get some information about how some of these schools have actually implemented shared services. And with Dr. McTaggart's suggestion, we looked at 4 of these schools, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, and Minnesota. And there were 3 predominant features of how these 4 schools have implemented shared services. And one thing that all of the institutions shared is that they all have some of what you might call system service units. And this is perhaps the most apparent or logical way that a system would implement shared services. There's a unit that is operated at the system level, managed at the system level, and serves the role of providing system services system-wide. There were a couple of institutions, Illinois and Maine, which have also implemented what at least Maine calls an integrated administrative structure. And so these would include units that are operated at the system level and primarily responsible to system officials, but are responsible for performing a specific set of services for a specific campus. I think this model would also include, in some cases, officials who have a direct reporting relationship to the system, but also perhaps a dotted line reporting relationship to a particular campus. And we'll jump forward in a couple of slides and look at some examples of this real quickly, but before we do that, I wanted to mention a couple of types of features of shared service implementation at these schools that you can't really see on an organizational chart. The first would be the University System of Maine, which is in the process of or very recently approaching the implementation of shared services. One of the primary ways that they approached this in the area of human resources was not to create a larger system HR office, but to identify areas on campuses where they had capacity to expand and provide more services and therefore reduce efficiency. So for example, finding one campus that had excess capacity in its payroll office to take over the payroll function of another campus. A very opportunistic way of approaching shared services. And then the second kind of feature the 3 of these schools displayed was the importance of academic coordination and mission differentiation. At Maine and Minnesota, both, they have adopted purpose or mission statements that emphasize the importance of having distinct missions for their component campus institutions and the importance of being more as a system than just the sum of the parts.
And Nick, can you share one of those, you shared one of those missions in our last task force meeting. I think it's relevant here. Why don't you read that for us? The one that you read for us in our last meeting.
I think I read the mission statement that's been adopted by the University of Maine, which their slogan or their summary of their mission is one university for all of Maine. And they define that as 7 mission differentiated, mutually dependent campuses operating as one fully integrated university, singularly focused on student success and responsive service to the state of Maine. Minnesota similarly identifies the purpose of the system structure as the distinctiveness of our campuses and the comprehensive and distributed nature of our system allow the University of Maine to be greater than the sum of its parts. So just a couple of examples of these shared administrative structures. Probably a little bit hard to see. This is the organizational chart for the flagship campus, the largest campus in the University of Maine system, the campus at Orano. One of the interesting decisions that they have made as part of their recent shared services implementation is to create the position of campus business officer, chief business officer at the campus level. And at each campus, this person's direct reporting relationship is to the system CFO, with a dotted line reporting relationship to the campus. At the University of Illinois, this is the organizational chart for the system, not the campus. Most of these units that are depicted on the organizational chart are really system service units. They're operated by the system and provide services throughout the system, but they have created a specific business office that is run by the system for each campus and handles all of the business and financial services for that campus. Again, the direct reporting relationship for these offices is to the system CFO with a dotted line to the campus chancellor. One final piece of information from these 4 schools is how they measure the success of their shared services and why they have chosen to implement shared services. And the goals are some of the same things that were mentioned earlier today. Reducing administrative costs, but also enhancing the quality of services, aligning the expenditures of the university system with its mission of research, teaching, and service, and advancing cooperation within the system. And in talking to the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems and National Association of System Heads, they recommended that for more follow-up, we reach out to the University System of Maryland, which has, in their view, made some strides in adopting a culture that facilitates collaboration, as well as Penn State, which is in the process of implementing HR shared services, and the University of Texas system, which is currently undergoing kind of a system audit or evaluation.
All right, well, thank you, Nick. Any questions for Nick on that? It was a very good case study on shared services. We really appreciated the data, and maybe we can use some of that to help us in what we're trying to do here. So, any questions for Nick?
I have one.
Yes, John.
The University of Texas may, in some respects, have some similarities to us because they have campuses that are each known in their own right. I'd say they also have small F flagship campus. Since this is going to be an ongoing task force, do you have the ability to keep track of their analysis as they're moving along if they're tracking the same issues that we're tracking?
So what we looked at in doing this research was publicly available information. I'm not sure that there has been a public report from the University of Texas system on the study. I think it'd be very helpful to make a contact with someone within the system who might be able to share some of that information. And I'm happy to do the work of reaching out, but I'm sure that a personal relationship might be.
I also think in that regard, you could reach out to Chancellor-designate Agrawal, who comes from that system.
So can I ask a clarification, just to make sure I'm understanding roles? So at least for HR, finance, and IT, we've been working very hard on this issue through the administrative review, and my HR campus counterparts, we're working many, many hours every week, and we have some time deadlines that we're hitting to have a proposed model in place and so forth. So it feels a little bit like we may have 2 parallel tracks that are working the same problem.
They're parallel, but let me say this, the administrative review process and timelines being run by Ryan will take precedence over this, because I know you all have some specific goals and timelines. We want to make sure that we're aware of that. That's why Ryan's been added to the task force, but you cannot slow that down. I appreciate everybody participation. I am very interested in feedback, not just from the curators, but from the general officers, from anybody who was here, as to whether we're making process, what your questions are, what you might want. We might add some others for the next discussion. I will say, while all curators are here, I've been made aware by other curators of very tight timelines. What I'm going to ask Daryl is to go ahead and open, and you chair the upcoming executive session while Moon and I do the press conference on one particular item, and I'll run in there, but everybody needs to leave, so the executive session will start immediately and won't be waiting for me in the